Hello, and you're listening to the Book Was Better podcast, the podcast where we talk about the book of the film. I'm Luke.
I'm Lizzy.
I'm Jessica.
I'm Suzanne.
I'm Courtney.
I'm Paris.
And I'm Jacinta.
And this week, we're writing Elfman!
Hey you, put down the popcorn and turn on the light. It's gonna be alright, my friend. In the end, take my hand. Trust me, the book was better.
No one's gonna have any idea what the fuck we just said there. We are writing the novelization of Elfman for Christmas. So, firstly, thank you everybody for being here. This is the hugest show we've ever done.
That's alright.
Which
There's so many bodies. So many bodies.
it is. It's just a seething
It's a sea of
mass
sweaty bodies.
of writhing female bodies in my room right now. It's wonderful. It's Santa knew exactly what I wanted. We are doing episode 150 of The Book Was Better. Jess, can you believe 150?
I'm amazed and horrified.
That's like when you came up with this podcast, because Jess, if you're a new listener, was the originator of this show.
It was Grug, really. It was my husband. So we found the book and he was the one who said, you should do that as a novelisation.
Speaking of Grug, he's the one we've got to blame today as well, right? Grug chose this film that we're doing.
Yeah.
So, look, to just kind of explain what this episode is about, this is very different from our usual episodes. This is an annual tradition, and what we do is we criticise authors all throughout the year. We read excerpts of their books, we make fun of them, we make fun of their writing, we have a lot of personal jabs at them. This is the time of year when we turn that all around. We take the transcript of a film, usually just a couple of scenes, and we write the novelisation, which is a wonderful experience because I think it's insurance for the next year. If there's ever an author that goes, hey, you guys think it's so easy, you try it, we just direct them to the episodes.
If Alan Dean Foster drops dead and they need someone to write episode 8, bang.
Yeah.
We are here.
So it's part show reel.
And every time I do this, I seriously think, like, I could quit my job and do this. This is fucking easy.
Yeah. What you're going to discover very soon into this is that we are really, really good at writing novelizations.
Yeah, it's true. It's so much fun as well.
But I'm really good at reading other people writing novelizations.
Yes, a few logistics here. But the thing is, none of this would be possible without the hard thrusting efforts of Tim, the stats man. Yeah. Now, Tim, hardest working guy in the business, he chooses the film usually. I usually choose the film. This time I said, Tim, you choose the film. Your husband chose the film instead. And he writes out the scenes. He basically prepares a document which has character descriptions, transcripts of the scenes. It's a film that none of us have watched.
None of us ever want to watch. No. Nobody has ever watched this film in the history of people watching films.
Not even the people in the film have watched this film.
I'm not even sure that it's real. I'm still... This was an elaborate joke.
So we have no preconceptions whatsoever, and then we each get hold of a sequence or two and we write it out. Now, this year, Tim went an extra step. He gave us the entire film broken into 16 chapters. And for the very first time in Book Was Better history, what you're about to hear is a novelisation of the entire film. We've done the whole thing between us. So...
Think of it as a pre-Christmas punishment.
Well...
You're going to enjoy yourself too much at Christmas. This is bringing you down a few notches.
A lot of people travel. I think of this as a gift of an audiobook. So you might want to stop after a couple of chapters and then pick it up later on, but it's probably going to be a couple of...
Don't stop. It's best if you don't stop.
It's best just to keep going.
You'll never come back to it.
It's going to probably be a couple of hours, but we've never done this before. We're not going to interrupt in between. We're going to just do this chapter. We're going to read out our own work with the exception of... Jacinta, you're reading out work from...
Kenney, delightful listener, and Hector Weenis / Euripides Kronk / whatever he's calling himself this week.
Could be anything. And Paris.
Yes.
You're reading...
I'm reading on behalf of Zach.
So, Zach, you'll know who did a show quite recently. So we'll explain that as we go. But the film is Elf Man. I had never heard of this. It's from 2012, and it is a film about an elf that gets left at a family's house, becomes a superhero, and it stars Wee Man from Jackass. So look it up if you want to, watch the trailer, but as far as finding out all about the story, we're about to share it with you.
I can't believe this was made in 2012. I knew nothing about it. I assumed it was from the late 80s. It's so bad.
I wonder how many times Wee Man gets hit in the dick in this movie. Probably heaps.
Not enough.
And we've done this Exquisite Corpse style as well. No one has heard what anybody else has written yet. I wrote the first and last scenes originally and didn't even look at what happened in between. And then I added an extra 2 scenes because there were 2 left. So you'll be hearing a little bit of me, but that's okay. I'm your host. And yeah, we're going to get into it. But first, I just want to thank you guys again. This is a huge undertaking. I want to say that it's very humbling and wonderful to me to think that a group of adults, you know, and we're talking about successful people. You have jobs, kids, all sorts of things there.
Is that all it takes to be successful?
You know,
higher degrees.
Yeah.
Yes.
People who really have things going. A lot of you are over the age of 30. Those that aren't make up for it by being very attractive. So I think this is fantastic that you would not only spend your hard-earned leisure time writing a novelization of Elfman, but that you all join together weekend before Christmas to give this gift to our listeners. This is a crazy thing for anyone to be doing, but hey, you're crazier for listening to it. So
to be fair,
all
like
on you.
I am in the market for one of your kidneys. So,
yeah.
so this is not a freebie.
That's fair enough. Just be warned that his liver's shot, so no promises on the kidneys.
All right, shall we read Elfman?
Let's do it.
Do it.
All right.
Okay. Elfman, Chapter 1, by me. It never snows on Christmas anymore, sighed Ryan, staring wistfully at the sky, praying for an avalanche of white to blanket the bleak semi-rural Pennsylvanian landscape and mask his pain. His 8-year-old sister Casey, just 3 years his junior physically and 13 years mentally, paused from ineptly pinning lurid decorations to the rustic porch. Yeah, she muttered vaguely. Let's go get Daddy, Ryan sighed again. How was that even a valid response? Their father was smart, sure, a scientist, yes, but not even he could defeat the looming behemoth that was global warming. The changing climate of our planet weighed heavily on the paranoid Ryan, a crushing burden too big for his delicate frame, a charging beast that threatened to Al Gore him on its horns. Shuddering, he scanned the sky again. And where was Christ in all of this? How could he turn his back on the time-honoured traditions of Christmas? Tomorrow was his birthday, after all. Would it kill him again to get his dad to let loose with a couple of fucking flakes of snow? ADHD had a kung fu grip on Casey, who was already through the front door and bellowing aimlessly up the stairs. Dad! Ryan's interest peaked. Dad couldn't save the Earth, but perhaps he could build a snow machine. I mean, he was always going on about white power that and white power this. Dad! Ryan echoed. Aware of the sudden competition from her brother, the insufferable Casey sweetened her tone. Daddy, she sang in a transparently sickening attempt to curry his favour, an effort wasted on a man who would rather eat shit than sample Indian food. Ryan was not about to be obnoxious by his sister. He nearly busted his lungs. Dad, let's go! Casey started to shit. Time to decorate the tree, she shrieked with renewed purpose. Annoyed, Ryan at least understood her urgency. It was Christmas Eve. When it came to decorating the tree, it was really now or never. How did that deadbeat dad always leave it so late? His classmates all had theirs up at the beginning of December. Was life just an endless string of shitty disappointments? Their father, Eric, was safely holed up in his usual place. A half-hearted deadbeat at best, he tolerated his bastard kids, but his real passion was science. Eric had sequestered himself in his makeshift home office lab wearing his stern white "don't talk to me, I'm sciencing" lab coat. A sure sign that for now children should not only be seen and not heard, but preferably seen playing in a busy street. Get the boxes from the attic, I'll be right there, he brazenly lied. That's when Casey dropped the bombshell. Hurry up, Grandma's on the way. And indeed she was. Alone in her big black car, cutting through cold grey fields and twisted trees, was a solemn, wrinkled figure. It looked like a hearse with the corpse at the wheel, getting closer with every second, getting older too. What a fucking farce, thought Ryan in the attic, rummaging through forgotten boxes for sad angels and crumpled tinsel. If Grandma wasn't coming, we wouldn't even have a tree. We'd be lucky to have an upside-down broom in a pot. It's all a show, a grand pantomime for Granny. Let's put up all the trimmings at the last possible second and pretend that everything's still okay for the old goat. Downstairs, the completely off-task Casey was making some sort of eggnog now, using snotty fingers to shove entire eggs and cookies into a blender that no rational adult would have allowed her to touch. Ryan shifted a box of decorations which split instantly, spilling discount baubles all over the floor. Who gives a goddamn crap, he thought. He belligerently dragged a string of lights into the living room and pondered making a noose. Casey poured an overfilled glass of toxic nog and began her sinister climb up the stairs towards her father. The possibilities of this dashed Ryan's despair, and he hurried to join in the fun. "Dad, we've got eggnog for you," Ryan coaxed, and hopefully diarrhea. "Follow me downstairs," added Casey, slushing her malevolent man lure. Eric had no time for this eggnog shit. He was performing science miracles. "Look at this," he demanded, waving a tiny electronic chip in their fat little faces. "Version TX180. I think this might be the one." Bah, fucking kids, what do they know about anything? Excitedly, Eric began to plug the chip into a slot, gaping wantonly amongst a nest of knotted wires. Eric hesitated. What was the thing that bitch from Protective Services had told him? Oh yeah. Okay, safety first, he remembered, handing them each a pair of scratched-up safety glasses. No point getting the police involved this time. "Cross your fingers," he added, knowing full well that superstition didn't stand a chance against an accidental explosion. Eric flicked the switch. 10 miles away and closing in, Grandma's glassy eyes stared through the windshield as a curled brown leaf snapped free from its gnarled branch. It bounced over the car. She could have sworn she saw the grim spectre of death in a rearview mirror. Yes! Eric pumped the air enthusiastically. Ryan couldn't believe his eyes. It worked this time. Indeed, the chip had lit up, powering a monitor that burst excitingly to life, and then quickly quelled that excitement by displaying graphs and charts. Eric offered Ryan a fist bump, which he reluctantly accepted. It was the first contact that he'd had with his father in months. "Yay, Daddy," said that suck-up Casey, hoping to get her knuckles bumped. Instead, Eric high-fived her, which felt like kind of a diss. The kid's interest was waning, so Eric smugly explained, "This little chip generates enough electricity to power an entire house." He totally wished he could fist bump science. "Dad, that's awesome," lied Ryan, choosing the path of least resistance. "But we gotta get the house decorated before Grandma gets here." In the black car, a dark cloud fell over Grandma's creased face. It looked like someone turned a piece of corduroy into an origami swan. "I hope I get there," Grandma thought. "Oh yeah," remembered Eric. Damn, this kid was a buzzkill. "Okay, you guys go downstairs, get started, and I will be right there." With the kids falling for his lies again, Eric hid back in his office and picked up the phone. Eric's research partner Stu, however, was enjoying a very different style of Christmas Eve. In a busy bar wearing a crumpled business suit, Stu was laser-focused on two fine-looking, far younger, and fine wine fucked up honeys, both festooned with Santa hats and dresses so tight you could see all their piercings. "I might invest in that," joked Stu. It sounded like a venture, but he met their vaginas. "Oh, really?" giggled Tinsel Tits. "That would be fantastic." "It's a great idea," concurred the effectively interchangeable Tinsel Tits too. "You never know," chuckled Stu. Something was vibrating in his pants, but it turned out to be his phone. He kept it in his pocket right next to his vibrator. "Oh no, it had better not be that cockblocker." "Eric," said Stu. "Stu?" asked Eric. Strange, thought Stu. "You're calling me." "My man," offered Stu. Eric regained his senses, reaching into the recesses of his mind and remembering how phone calls worked. "You're not going to believe this," he blurted. "The TX180 scores off the charts. I'm holding the future of renewable energy in my hand." "I knew you'd crack it. Did I ever lose faith?" Tinsel Tits placed her hat on Stu's head. "I'd like to crack that," thought Stu. "I'd like to crack that in the crack." Elsewhere, in the black car, Grandma slowly turned her head. She could feel all her bones crack. "You're the one who made this possible, Stu," lied Eric. "Listen, you should really see it. I could meet you in town." I'm sure it's amazing, but we can't get into the patent office until after the holidays," lied Stu, perfectly blocking the cock block. Tinsel Tits drunkenly scraped the cream from her ungodly drink and dabbed a large dollop of it on his nose. She grinned at her friend, hoping that they too would soon have cream on their faces. Put it in someplace safe and we'll catch up, said Stu, now preoccupied with his penis. Stu, pleaded Eric cluelessly. Did you hear what I just said? This changes everything. It's Christmas Eve, Eric. Santa's on the way, and I'm about to come down some chimneys. I'm going to stick a surprise in the pudding. I'm going to have a kiss under the camel toe. Stu held out his phone. Merry Christmas! The party girls chorused, ho ho ho, obviously proud of their profession. Tonight was going to cost Stu a fortune. Click. Eric was all alone with his chip, and he had no idea what to do with himself. Oh, that's right, he had kids. Okay, let's get this party started, crooned Eric, busting some embarrassing moves. The lab coat was discarded. Now in full party mode, he interrupted Ryan's half-assed attempts to light the tree to give him a quick high five. The demotion did not go unnoticed. Oblivious, Casey laid 3 stockings upon the coffee table. Dad, Ryan, Casey, and then a 4th. It was cleaner than the others, like it had barely been used. It said, Mom. I miss Mommy, sighed Casey forlornly. Eric kissed her on her sticky forehead. How did she get so sticky? I know, Pumpkin. I miss her too. Where did Casey find Dead Mom's stocking? He just hoped it wasn't haunted. The last thing they needed was a ghost running amok during Grandma's Christmas visit. That was more a Halloween thing. He continued, but we'll do our best to have a good Christmas this year. Dad, begged a tangled Ryan, give me a hand with this. Ryan longed for some form of adult supervision, lest he be strangled or electrocuted. Casey worked fast to divert Eric's attention. What's this, Dad? There, in one of the abandoned boxes, was a strange wooden doll. An elf, almost sinister despite his pointy ears and comical hat. Oh, wow, said Eric far too excitedly. I haven't seen that in years, ha! Abandoning Ryan, he switched his focus to the doll. Oh, this is my elf from when I was a kid. He was my favourite. Please don't be haunted, thought Eric. Please don't be haunted. Casey's tiny face puckered with disgust. Your favourite toy was a doll? Perhaps there was more than one fruitcake this Christmas. Eric shrugged. Suddenly Ryan spasmed as a suppressed memory hit him like a bolt. Oh, hey, Dad! That lady from the butcher's shop called. Something about a ham? Eric sprung to attention like the Manchurian Candidate. Yes, the ham, he intoned. Oh, the ham. The ham was Eric and the lady's code word for fucking. Sadly, the ham fantasy was brusquely interrupted by the strangled beeping of a car horn. It moaned sadly like a great white whale who used to sing but stopped giving a shit. Grandma's here, shrieked Ryan and Casey in a chorus of mixed of terror and excitement. They ran outside to check if she was impatient and alive or passed away on the horn. Ha ha, chuckled Eric distractedly. He glanced at his elf doll and gave it a mock salute. Please don't kill me, he thought.
Grandma was what a kind soul would have called an old battle axe. Indomitable, indestructible, and sharp on multiple sides. What she lacked in culinary talent, she made up for in enthusiasm, talcum powder, and grand maternal ferocity. The jury was out on whether she truly needed her walking frame. A cynic would have drawn attention to the multitude of uses she found for it. Clothes horse, a climbing frame for small children, a skeletal instrument of destruction at Black Friday sales. Whatever her physical state, Grandma kept her walking frame with her. It was as much a part of her as her carpet bag and lavender rinse. Casey barreled from the landing and onto the porch, hanging precariously from the railing. Merry Christmas, Grandma! She caught up with Ryan as he headed past her, colliding with the old woman for a 3-part festive group hug. Oh, Grandma said, pleasantly winded. You're my favourite grandkids, you are. Ryan ducked under one substantial arm to retrieve her present bag from the back seat. I'll carry these. Grandma peered at him with mock ferocity. No peeking and no shaking. I'll know. Grandma's son, a rushing and visibly late Eric, emerged from the front door with the wild-eyed look of a father who had left Christmas preparations to the dangerously last minute. Hi, Mum, he pecked her on the cheek, sidestepping her frame with practised ease. Merry Christmas. Grandma could smell lackadaisical parenting. If she'd had the facial dexterity to raise an eyebrow, she would have. Ah, where are you off to in such a hurry? Eric studiously avoided her eyes. Gotta do some last-minute stuff. Think you can handle these two? He'd successfully diverted her with her grandchildren. She beamed. I think I can. I handled you, didn't I? Nothing could be worse. Eric laughed heartily, though she'd been entirely serious. Hey, listen, Grandma's in charge, all right? I'll be right back and we'll finish trimming the tree. He directed a grateful look at his mother. Thanks, Mum. Bye-bye, son. She flapped a beringed hand at him as he folded awkwardly into his car, backing out of the driveway. Grandma jingled her keys meaningfully. All right, you take those inside. I'll bring the car into the garage. The kids had a clear designation of actions in the process of transferring Grandma from the outside world into their house. Ryan went for the walking frame, usually attempting a few sweet rail slides with it when safely out of sight, and Casey produced the cane from the coat closet, in this case festively looped with alternating red and green ribbon. Grandma made appropriate noises over the modifications and looked over the messy living room with the look of a parent preparing a list for their adult child. What a lovely tree! It was a generous assessment. The tree was lopsided and very unfinished. Tinsel dropped from high branches and pulled on the floor like depressed eels, and a very startled Rudolph had been jammed on the treetop instead of the traditional angel. A small row of broken baubles on the mantelpiece was testament to the almost success of the attempt. As they stood inspecting the tree, a pink-cheeked elf fell from its perch and hit the wooden floor with a sad thud. Dad was busy, so we aren't finished yet, Ryan said, almost apologetically. Oh, well, Grandma was well versed in distracting from the inadequacies of her son. Let's get right back to it. She smacked her hand onto her box of gifts, settling herself onto the couch beside it. Go ahead and take these things out. Casey extracted a pink-wrapped bundle. This one's for me, she said, happily stating the obvious. Grandma nodded indulgently. But you can't open it till morning. Ryan was casting a covetous eye over the other gifts nestled in the bag. Can we open one tonight? Grandma pursed her lips in an impressive show of faux indecision. Well, I have one, just one, that we can open right now. Both children gave thrilled yelps of anticipation and went almost immediately silent as Grandma revealed a massive fruitcake with a flourish of sarin wrap and eye-watering brandy. Cassie had a sudden warning gastronomic twinge. Ryan felt immediately queasy. Brandy fumes filled their eyes and noses, and through a watery film the fruitcake distorted, twisting and pulsing. A haphazard baking crevice splitting like a gaping maw with lupine fangs and glowing, flaming cherry eyes. Blinking rapidly, they backed away. Grandma's fruitcake! Grandma enthused, flattered by the obvious awe in the faces of her audience. Ryan recovered first. Wow, Grandma! Wow, awesome. You should really save this for a special occasion. Casey nodded violently, brandy tears streaming down her face. Grandma looked confused. It's Christmas. I mean, a really special occasion, like my birthday. Next August. Exactly. He extracted it from her, holding it at arm's length and backpedaling towards the hallway. Safely out of sight, he shoved it into the linen cupboard, resolving to tell Dad about it before it started to decompose and grow mushrooms. No one wanted a repeat of last year's fumigated Christmas, and Ryan could do without the following retching anger of his father. Casey had launched straight into an enthused tour of the baubles she'd made at school, one eye on the hallway, and relaxed into giddy relief as Ryan appeared and gave her a sweaty-palmed all clear.
Chapter 3 by Jessica. Eric strode through the Christmas wonderland of the town centre. Tinsel glittered in the windows of stores, adding a touch of sparkly magic to the rampant consumerism that threatened to destroy the planet. Neon lights, ordinarily bringing to mind sleazy pool halls and the temporary amnesia promised by dive bars, now seemed festive and joyful. Although he was laden down with frivolous purchases which would only be landfill and credit card debt by January, he hardly felt their weight. Carol singers, inexplicably dressed in Dickensian costume despite the fact that they were celebrating the birth of a Middle Eastern Jew 2,000 years ago, as part of a co-opted pagan festival of the winter solstice, clogged the pavement, but Eric simply smiled. As he crossed the road to avoid having to give them money, he didn't notice the ostensible florist's van pass behind him, despite its obviously fake name, Pollen and Wilts. No, all of Eric's attention was focused on the temple of meat and romance before him, Glavenstein's Butchers. Eric walked past the other customers in the shop, forgetting that while he was the main character in his own story, they were the main characters in their own. However, their stories would now have to include being cut off in the butcher's shop by a man with stars in his eyes. His feet hardly seemed to touch the ground as he reached the counter. Here she was, Amy, goddess of gristle, Amy, the brisket beauty, Amy, his fairy queen with a filleting knife. Hey, Eric said. Amy turned. Her eyes, though tired from her busy shift, sparkled with happiness. Eric! Eric's grand poetic speech dissipated from his overheated brain and he stuttered his excuses. Hi, I'm sorry I'm late. I've just been crazy busy with work. Amy smiled. Oh, it's not a problem. 'Tis the season. There was an awkward pause while she waited for him to make a similarly airy and trite remark in accordance with the rules of normal human interaction, but none came. Amy soldiered on. "I have your order right here." The ham she lifted from the display was as pink and succulent looking as her own sweet face. They slowly and awkwardly made their way to the till, the counter dividing them like a meat-filled moat, keeping hungry lovers apart. Amy valiantly tried to make polite conversation. How are you?" "Great, yeah." Eric trailed off, and Amy made another attempt. "How are things?" "Good, yeah." "Your kids?" Amy asked politely, knowing that a large part of customer service in a small town was feigning interest in other people's children. Oh, they're great. Yeah, well, you know, this time of year's always tough." "Of course, that's understandable," said Amy sympathetically, cursing herself for bringing up this line of conversation. "Yeah," said Eric meaninglessly. Mr. Glavenstein bustled past Amy behind the counter. Eric made an attempt to revive the now moribund conversation by including Amy's employer. "The decorations look amazing. You guys do an awesome job with the shop." Mr. Glavenstein smiled wearily. "It's all Amy's doing," he said politely, resisting the urge to add, "because I'm the only Jew in this grotesquely white-bread town and I don't give a shit about your plastic Santas and shitty reindeer." Amy smiled, while Eric continued to look lost. "Oh," Amy exclaimed, breaking yet another awkward silence. She handed over Eric's ham. "Thanks. Merry Christmas, Amy." "Merry Christmas to you and yours." "Thanks," said Eric idiotically. He walked toward the door, not noticing Amy droop with disappointment, despite the awkward and trite conversation. Eric paused at the door. "Gird your loins, Eric," he said to himself. After wasting a few seconds trying to think of a pun involving pork loins, he turned and marched back to the counter. Amy was wielding a cleaver with all the savagery of a woman who has spent Christmas Eve working in retail. Once again, Eric demonstrated both his ardour for Amy and his complete disregard for all others by cutting in front of another customer. "Amy?" She paused with the cleaver in the air, making his heart beat fast with a combination of love, fear, and a nascent but quickly growing fetish which might eventually become troubling. "Is the ham okay?" "Oh, yeah. Look, I know it's Christmas Eve, and you probably have plans with family or—" "Actually, I don't." Amy was lying. She had in fact been invited to Christmas Eve at her sister's, but she was eager to find an alternative to eating dry turkey with a bunch of relatives whose tediousness and casual racism both grew with every alcoholic drink consumed. "Oh, well, if you'd like, you could maybe stop by. We're just having Christmas dinner with family. You know, the kids and my mother, and she can be a bit of a handful, but maybe you—" "That'd be nice," said Amy quickly, before she could think about what she was signing up for. "Oh, we're having ham this year instead of turkey," Eric explained proudly and moronically, holding the very ham in question. "I know," said Amy, wondering if she'd made a mistake. "Right." They fell into an awkward pause as they both examined their regrets. Suddenly, Amy saw her loophole. "Except, we're open late and I took the whole shift." She trailed off with an apologetic and relieved smile. Eric made no effort to hide his pathetic disappointment at being forced to spend Christmas only with his own family. "Oh, no problem, you could—" "I would really like to," Amy lied enthusiastically. "Well, you could stop by whenever," Eric offered pointlessly. "I mean, the door's open, you know, we'll be up, we'll be trimming the tree and making cookies and, you know, Christmas." "It's so sweet of you to ask," murmured Amy, already picking up her cleaver. "Aw." He turned to trudge off and finally free the counter for a long-suffering customer. "Merry Christmas," called Amy automatically. Yeah, Merry Christmas." Amy felt a twinge of sadness. No matter how bad someone else's family was, it was always better than being forced to be around your own. She thought about the weird marshmallow and jello salad her aunt always made, and the way her brother-in-law thought it was hilarious to burp during any lull in conversation. Mr. Glavenstein looked over and saw Amy's face. He cleared his throat. "Oh, Mr. Glavenstein," Amy said, remembering that she had been reprimanded 3 times that week for daydreaming. "I'll have Mr. Brecciarini's turkey ready in a minute." "Go," said her boss, gesturing towards Eric's slumped, defeated profile. "But there's no one else here. Merry Christmas, and get out of here before I change my mind." Amy squealed excitedly and literally jumped with joy. Leaving work early on Christmas Eve was a magical treat. "Happy Hanukkah, Mr. Glavenstein," she yelped, having a vague idea that this was some kind of Jewish Christmas. Mr. Glavenstein rolled his eyes. Yeah, Hanukkah's over. Go, go." He submitted resignedly to her embrace, and she hurried off.
Nice.
All right. Let's get this party started.
Scene 4 by Lizzy. Casey startled at a movement in her periphery, a swoop of shadow in the nighttime gloom. She turned to the window and peered out, doubting herself. Perhaps it was just a reflection of a neighbour's Christmas lights. Her attention focused entirely on the inky depths of the night, or at least the part of it contained within the chipped and dusty window frame. Casey could hear a clock ticking from the other room, syncopating with her own heartbeat. She shifted her weight in her chair, leaning closer to the window. Suddenly 2 small circles of light appeared. However, they seemed to draw and capture light rather than emit it, making the surrounding darkness seem somehow darker and gloomier still. Casey was frozen in place, contemplating her next move. The first light blinked off. The second light followed milliseconds later, and then both lights blinked back on. A third rhythm, joining the ticking clock and her heartbeat. The seconds ticked by. Casey held her breath and tensed her muscles. She clenched the knife in her hand. She prepared herself. But before she made her move, the owl that had been watching her through the window leapt off the branch and with a low hoot swooshed towards the window before disappearing off into the night. Casey let out her breath and relaxed the hand holding the knife. She must be going crazy, jumping at shadows of birds. She needed to relax, or else she wouldn't make it through the night. Casey smiled at herself, her expression half embarrassment, half relief, and looked down at the plate in front of her. It was a medley of textures and consistencies. What was once cabbage was now a pile of grey-green flat worms. The promise of 2 sausages lived beneath the outer shells of charcoal. A pile of boiled carrots threatened to burst their cell walls and amalgamate into mush. There was a slice of what must have been bread in a past life. Casey looked across the table at her brother's plate. He had not started his dinner either. She set her jaw and picked up her fork. Tentatively, she prodded at the carrots. Her stomach gurgled a plea, but her fork refused to maintain a hold on any of the mush. Casey stole a look across at Grandma. The creature was seated at the table with them, a full plate in front of her completing the triangle. Grandma's head hung low, her neck bent, and the chin at her chest. Her shoulders were slumped, and her arms hung limply at her sides. Only the soft rise and fall of her grey curls betrayed her. Casey glanced over her grandma's body at the open kitchen door behind her, then met her brother's eyes over the table. "Now?" they seemed to say. The clock ticked. "Grandma?" Casey whispered. A short huff of breath was the only response. "Grandma?" Ryan blurted, his voice loud in the vacuum. The creature's head snapped up with an astonishing speed. Her body seemed to swell and grow like a reinflating balloon. Grandma slowly turned to Ryan, fixing her gaze on his small frame. As Grandma slowly filled the space, Ryan seemed to shrink to accommodate her. "Where's Dad?" Casey whispered. Grandma shifted her attention at the question. "Oh, I'm sure he's busy," Grandma said. Her voice was low and sweet, and her mouth formed a smile as she continued. "Getting presents for a certain good boy and girl." The words seemed to hang in the air above the table. A certain good boy and girl. Casey and Ryan knew what that meant. Ryan shook his head quickly. "He's probably still at the butcher shop," he was trying to reassure himself. "Huh?" Grandma snapped, and pierced Ryan with a sharp stare. He swallowed shakily, realizing his misstep. Grandma had a way of looking at him as if she could see his thoughts forming into words before they were yet out of his mouth. He was no longer sure when he had spoken aloud and when she had just known. How much did she know already? "He thinks the butcher's cute," Ryan improvised. Grandma's eyes narrowed as if focusing her powers. "Mr. Glavenstein?" she provoked. Casey's face had contorted into a mask of terror, watching Ryan's fall but powerless to stop it. She shook her head at him and pleaded with her eyes, but Ryan had no choice but to continue. "No," he stuttered. "The lady butcher." "Well, in for a penny," thought Casey. "Her name is Amy," she offered. "Oh, really?" Grandma sat back in her chair, musing over this apparently new information. Casey and Ryan shared a look. Had she bought it? Emboldened by their success, Casey forged ahead. "He said he'd be back to finish decorating the tree." The question was implicit in the statement. "And bake cookies," Ryan offered. Grandma sat up straight in her chair, filling the room again and seeming to loom over the table. She snapped, "But I already baked you cookies." Casey tried to keep her focus on the creature, but she couldn't help glancing at the pile of blackened biscuits. She remembered the cookies. Of course she did. Smoke still rose from the charred remains. The silence was punctured by the treacherous clock, chiming out their future. 1 chime, 2 chimes, Casey counted. Grandma hunched over as if a spring coiling. 3, then 4. The clock's bell finally fell silent after 8 chimes, its part in the evening's activities now complete. The room fell silent again, apart from the endless ticking, tick-tock, tick-tock. The seconds stretched and Casey waited, her hopes seeping away. Grandma was still. Tick-tock, tick-tock. The silence pounded in Casey's ears, overwhelming her with imagined sounds and screams. When Grandma did speak, Casey almost missed it. 8 o'clock. The noise seemed to come from very far away. Grandma's mouth close to her chest, her face not visible. Time for bed. Ryan blinked. Are you serious? He said out loud. Fuck, he thought. He'd spoken out loud again. Fuck, fuck, fuck. He had to fix it, or at least he had to try. Dad always lets us, he began. No smart talk from you, young man, Grandma boomed. As she spoke, she slowly rose from her chair and drew herself up to her full height, like a dragon about to unfurl its wings. Could she breathe fire as well, Ryan thought? Wouldn't fucking surprise me. He hadn't been there when the cookies were baked. 2 children were very small at the opposite ends of the table. Grandma slowly lifted her arm and pointed at Ryan. Her movements, as if the fear in the air had made it thick as molasses. Take your plate to the kitchen, she commanded, while pointing at Ryan. Her attention spread to Casey as she spoke. Go brush your teeth. But the children didn't move. The 3 were frozen in a medieval tableau, the children staring up at Grandma, the creature pointing at Ryan. An explosion felt imminent. However, Grandma was not one to explode. Her power was quiet. Her power was subtle. Her power was on the edge of perception. Without moving a muscle, she spoke in her low, sweet voice. Or Santa Claus won't come. She sank through the thick air back down into her seat and sat back, silent and content. The children got up shakily. They cleared their uneaten dinners in silence as Grandma watched on. She followed them out of the room and watched as they climbed the stairs. Lights out in 5 minutes, she warned. Casey froze mid-step. Ryan's eyes flew wide. 5 minutes? Their minds whirred with memories and imagined future memories. A snarl from below spurred them on. March, Grandma commanded, and they obeyed. This stinks, Ryan thought. Or did he speak? Grandma watched the children through her narrowed slits until they disappeared into the bathroom. Contented, she turned and moved into the living room. As she floated, she pulled and tugged at her skin, reworking the folds until it no longer resembled the flower-patterned day dress she had seemed to be wearing. Now she appeared as a grandmother, readied for bed. A white cotton nightgown with a lace collar and deep pockets at the front to hold sweets and treats. She floated to the mantelpiece and perused the ornaments and decorations, finally selecting an idol in the shape of an elf. It felt heavy in her hand and was cold to the touch, as if made of metal despite its appearance. Grandma smiled without mirth and used her cane to propel herself out of the room again, and then up the stairs to seek out the children. Casey was already in bed. Grandma had no footsteps to announce her arrival, but Casey had learnt to sense her. The air felt different when Grandma was near. The creature floated towards the bed, a ghoulish gondola. Casey saw Grandma sit at the end of the bed, although she felt no weight. Why the long face? Grandma asked. This is the worst Christmas ever, Casey whispered. Oh, I don't know about that, Grandma said softly, but did not elaborate. Why does Daddy hate Christmas? Casey asked. It was a bit of a non sequitur, but Casey needed to keep the creature occupied. Ryan had been slow to get ready and he would not yet be in bed. Oh, honey, Grandma overacted. He doesn't hate it. It's just that this time of year brings up a lot of memories. For me too, Casey replied. Of course. Grandma patted Casey's hand. A stranger watching the scene would think it a warm gesture, but both the participants knew better. After a moment, Grandma produced the elf idol from her pocket. She put the figurine into Casey's hand. Do you know that this once belonged to your great-grandfather? He handed it down, and then your father had it, and now it's your turn. Casey performed the best impression of a smile she could manage. Oh, Casey, the creature said. I know you miss your mommy. We all do. It's like with Grandpa. She isn't ever coming back. I know, Casey whispered. At some point in time, everybody, even your father, has to move on. Casey tensed at her grandma's word. Did the creature know of her father's plans? She and her brother had not heard from their father in so long, but she had faith in his abilities. He would be back soon. He would. Casey's thoughts were interrupted by the creature continuing. But we won't ever forget your mother. The blood drained from her face, her mind a blur of memories. The elf doll was still in her hand. You know, it was always believed that when times got really tough, you could make a wish on this little fellow, the creature taunted. And sometimes a real elf would appear and help you out. Casey looked at the figurine in her hand for the first time. Sounds unrealistic, she monotoned, but she glanced at the bedroom window nonetheless. Well, Christmas is about hope, about wishes coming true. You never can tell. Casey held the doll in her hand and stared at it. She blocked everything else out of her vision, focusing only on the comical elf in her grasp. She took a deep breath and concentrated as she said, I wish we could be a happy family again and bring Dad home. That's all I want for Christmas. Ryan would be in bed by now. Now all she wanted was for the creature to leave. She hugged the doll tightly and rolled over to face the wall as if to sleep. The creature must think it had won. Grandma smiled. She had been concerned, but there was still a kernel of hope in Casey. The child could still be used for the ritual. And now the elf doll was in place too. The creature stood up and floated over to the door. Night, night, honey, she said. Good night, Casey replied automatically. Sweet dreams, Grandma commanded, as she turned off the light and floated from the room. She closed the door, and Casey fell into the darkness.
Scene 5 by Kenney, as read by Jacinta. The big man yelled out in pleasure as a cold chill bit into his rosy cheeks. He was flying, and the snow-covered world spun dizzyingly around him. In the war on Christmas, he fights on the front lines, the original Winter Soldier. His name, as any child could tell you, is Santa Claus, and this is his night. His sleigh, pulled by the 8 reindeer of legend, was impossibly full of gifts. He wore a red coat and hat, and at his side sat a tiny elf grinning wildly. Spotting the next of his many stops that night, Santa circled over a cozy home and began his approach. The sleigh zoomed dangerously fast towards the house, but its driver was skillful, and it landed on the snow-covered roof with scarcely a whisper. Feeling solid ground again under their hooves, the reindeer shuffled and neighed eagerly, pulling at the reins in the giant man's hands. Kenney reindeer don't neigh. Whoa, whoa, he called out to the excited animals. If the reindeer appreciated his carefully crafted Keanu Reeves impression, they certainly didn't show it. Santa turned to the elf sitting at his side. All right, navigator, what have we got here? Harper family, correct? Snapping to attention, the elf nodded in the affirmative, her nimble fingers tapping at the glowing tablet in front of her. Her dancing digits paused and her eyes widened. She held the tablet up to her obese employer. Santa looked down at the screen, which displayed a list of all the children who would visit on this magical night. Each youngster had an indicator that updated in real time, showing either a red naughty or a green nice. The navigator traced her finger on the screen, moving the list until the Harper family was visible. Instead of a naughty or nice, the word special wish blinked on and off. Santa smiled to himself, his eyes twinkling as he reached down and hefted his sack. A special wish, eh? It's been ages since you've had one of those. A deep, liquid rumble from his team of reindeer roused Santa from his musings. Jesus, Blitzen, again? Blitzen farted happily as Santa rapped his knuckles against the sleigh. Incoming, he bellowed and sauntered across the roof to the chimney, his sack swinging. A sleepy, huh? Drifted up from a pile of presents in the back of the sleigh. Seconds later, the mass of gifts exploded as a tiny figure jumped to its feet. He was small, smaller even than the navigator, but an elf to be sure. Where the navigator elf was smartly dressed and professional, this elf was rumpled and unshaven. He drew himself up to his full 3.5-foot height, snapping off what he hoped would pass for a crisp salute. I'm on it, Santa, he barked, before realising the big man was already halfway down the chimney. The navigator clicked her tongue disapprovingly as the slacker elf clumsily assembled a fishing pole, baiting the hook with a large red Christmas stocking. The rumbling had deepened into an almost noiseless vibration, hovering on the border between something heard with one's ears and something felt deep inside. The other reindeer shifted uneasily. With trembling hands, the dishevelled elf manoeuvred the stocking underneath Blitzen's wink. Kenney! Underneath underneath Blitzen's winking anus, just as an angry roar emitted from the animal's rear end. The elf squeaked in fear, but the foul-smelling blast of air and sound was nothing compared to what followed and followed. An endlessly flowing murky stream with evil brown islands and mysterious pits of coloured debris. Nearly overflowing now, the elf struggled mightily to hold the stocking in place as the deluge continued. And it still came. He imagined himself drowning in it. The smell was almost a solid thing, blocking out the light. And just as he was about to give up hope, just as the world had retreated to the tiniest of pinpricks in front of him, as consciousness slipped away, he realised it had ended. Blitzen gurgled happily. Reeling in his prize, the elf shuddered. Can you believe after all these years I finally get sleigh duty and my job is chief pooper scooper? He moaned to the navigator dejectedly. Disgusted, the navigator turned her attention back towards her tablet, tapping the icon to open her favourite social media app, Elfbook. The screen flashed black and she caught her reflection in the tablet. She wasn't as young as she once was, but she took care of herself. Her breasts, though small, rode high and firm above her taut belly. While she would never admit it, she loved when she overheard the younger elves refer to her as a melf.
Oh.
The navigator lived to help Santa on his annual journey, but the human world made her feel uneasy. She was a creature of the arcane that could not exist for long in man's realm of science and logic. Spent too long here, and a magical being could reason themselves right out of existence. Absorbed in her thought, the navigator half listened as the waste wrangler continued his monologue. Back in the day, all you ever had to do was give a kid a broken stick and a pile of mud. Now they all want beast lords and overpriced electronic gizmos. It's out of control. It's not fun anymore. Ignoring this, the navigator scrolled through the news displayed on the tablet, her gaze falling on a headline. Elvis seen alive. There's something wrong about this, a voice inside her cautioned. Now she thought about it, Elvis was suspiciously similar to the human singer Elvis. Why hadn't she noticed that before? Soon, stop, her mind warned, but she paid no heed. Elvis and Elvis, Elfbook and Facebook, two of everything? But elves have faces, so why wouldn't it be called Facebook in both worlds? It doesn't make sense. The world spun as she considered an ominous possibility. Of all of elfkind, the rich history of her people, what if it's all just a bunch of clumsy puns? Finally realising the danger, the female elf summoned her last ounce of strength and slammed the tablets shut, breaking the spell. Whatever truth she had been so tantalisingly close to grasping was gone now. Breathing heavily, she stared blankly at the manure manager as he finished his speech. I've been thinking, he whined. Is it all really worth it? Energised by her brush with non-existence, the navigator's eyes blazed. We've got the best boss in the world. We build toys and spread joy to children all over the world. What's not to like? The smaller elf cowered and the navigator hesitated, regaining her composure. Look, you're an elf. You've always been an elf. And that's what you'll always be. The male elf hung his head and slunk to the back of the sleigh. Santa's little helper, he sneered. Gazing off into the distance, he whispered to himself, I keep thinking there's something more out there for me. Inside the house, Santa placed each gift under the partially decorated tree. He froze as he heard a noise, and a look of concern crossed his face as he recognised the sound. It was the soft cries of the youngest harper, Casey. Santa tiptoed down a hall, following the heart-breaking noise to a bedroom door that he carefully opened and peeked inside. He watched the child asleep, reminding himself that there is nothing wrong with looking, not in the eyes of the law at least. The radio in Santa's ear emitted a burst of static, followed by the voice of his navigator. Little green to big red, we're behind schedule and we need you back in the cockpit ASAP. Taking one last look at the whimpering child, Santa noticed the tiny elf doll clutched in Casey's arms, and his eyes widened in surprise. Special wish indeed, he chuckled to himself as he turned towards the fireplace, one hand rubbing his sack thoughtfully, the other weaving the magic symbols that would carry him up the chimney. Back on the roof, a single glowing ember slowly rose out of the chimney and drifted up into the sky. Seconds later, the chimney erupted with sparks that swirled and spun in the air as if caught in a fierce wind, although the night was still. The small lights coalesced and their glow intensified, momentarily blinding the navigator. She rubbed her eyes, and suddenly Santa was beside her, climbing into the sleigh. Gathering his courage, the excrement expert climbed to his feet in the back of the sleigh. If I'm going to deal with these droppings, I at least deserve a little raise, he reasoned to himself. Hey, Santa, he began nervously. But the remainder of his request was lost as the big man lifted the reins and urged his team to the sky with a hearty ho ho ho. Losing his balance as the sleigh jerked forward, the shitty little elf tumbled from his perch, slamming his head into the icy roof before tumbling off the side and landing hard on the ground below. The dazed elf pulled himself to his feet just in time to see the silhouette of Santa's sleigh cross in front of the moon, high above, disappear into the darkness. Wait, Santa, what about me? Scared and angry, buried to his waist in the freezing snow, he realised he was on his own. The elf extended his middle fingers towards the sky, flipping it off with all his might.
Kenny, shame.
Amazing.
Chapter 6 by Lizzy. Forgot my name just then. Big Bucket's bare arms flashed in the setting sun's light as it flickered from between the buildings and trees that lined the streets. He drove the huge van with the gracefulness and confidence of a dancer, as if the car was an extension of his own lithe body. Each curving road was handled with a corresponding sweep of his powerful forearms, directing the steering wheel. Mickey stole glances of the driver from the passenger's seat, at Bucket's sharp cheekbones and taut muscles, watching the way light played over his chocolate skin. He was youthful, somewhere in his mid-20s, although his sheer size made him seem older, or perhaps ageless. Mickey was considerably older, feeling his years at 55. Every aching joint and grey hair was a brick in the wall between them. However, Mickey never felt old or fatherly around Bucket. They were partners, and their age wasn't an issue. Bucket knew he was being observed. Mickey was not subtle, however much he thought he was. His eyes were so blue, Bucket's favourite colour, that it was impossible not to know when they were trained on you. But Bucket would keep it professional. They were in the middle of a job, and Bucket was nothing if not professional. The calm companionship of the front of the van was the antithesis of the chaos in the back. JP, newly exported from France, was running his hands over their captive, feeling for hidden weapons, listening devices, or for the jackpot, the coveted chip. Well, Mickey prompted from the front, aware that he had been lost in his observation of the driver for too long. JP huffed. He had been through every pocket, explored every nook and every cranny, and he had ended up empty-handed. Not only was this monster not carrying a weapon, but JP had failed to locate the prize. If this man had no weapon, it must have been a stroke of dumb luck that they had been able to come upon him unawares and restrain him before he was able to unleash his hand-to-hand skills. He must be a force to be reckoned with under the proper circumstances. No wonder Mickey had needed a third. JP thought that Bucket would have been able to hold his own, but 3 is definitely better odds than 2. The captive looked at JP with fierce eyes. Although the man's hands were tied and tape covered his mouth, JP felt uneasy. Nothing, JP confessed. So you don't have the chip on you? Mickey was astonished. They had planned this so carefully. Where did it go wrong? Where is it? The bound man grunted. Mickey was rerunning the entire plan in his head, trying to pinpoint the weakness. Come on, he muttered. He felt frustrated at himself. You better spill the beans or you will suffer the consequences, my friend, JP muttered. He was brave while the man was tied up, but he suddenly felt doubtful of his knot-tying skills. What if the man was not properly secured, and he was just waiting for the right moment to attack? This was JP's first job, and his confidence was not what he wished it was. He really needed this to go well. Speak up, Mickey said to JP. The sound of the van made it difficult to hear what was going on in the back. Maybe you should take the tape off his mouth, Bucket joked, trying to elicit a smile from Mickey. However, JP, already nervous and jumpy, thought that Bucket was sassing him. JP forgot himself for a moment and snapped back at his bosses. Don't tell me how to conduct my business. He immediately regretted the remark, and he hoped that Mickey and Bucket would understand that it was due to the stress of the moment and the difficult situation that they found themselves in. Please don't fire me, he thought. Take the tape off, Mickey said, not unkindly. JP had a tricky job, and he understood JP must be feeling stressed at not having found the chip. "Oh, right away," JP exclaimed, thankful for Mickey's response. He had kept his job for now. "No more screw-ups, okay?" he berated himself silently. JP hesitated a moment before getting close enough to the man to pull the gag off. Every moment he was close to the man was a moment he might pounce. However, the captive did not pull his hands free and attack JP. Instead, he yelped in pain, a red mark across his face where the tape had been. "Well?" Mickey prompted from the front. The man drawled. "I dropped it in the mail before I went shopping." It was an obvious lie. The man wasn't even trying to be convincing. What was his game? Mickey laughed an empty laugh. "Come on, we've been tailing you since you left your house," he explained patiently. "You didn't drop it anywhere. You are going to tell us exactly where you stashed that chip, right now." Bucket smiled. Mickey was definitely behaving more assertively than he had before. He made a mental note to discuss Mickey's progress with him later. It was important to give constructive feedback and to acknowledge personal and professional growth. JP, on the other hand, was concerned with the security of their captive. Although the man was restrained and had no weapon, unfortunately JP also had no weapons. He was a pacifist at heart, and only resorted to violence when absolutely necessary. The violence they had already enacted today was required to right the wrongs that this evil man had planned. They needed to get that chip before it was too late, before more people suffered. JP looked around the van for anything he could use in case things got necessary. In desperation, he picked up a spray bottle filled with water. He held it up menacingly and glared at the captive, but the man remained silent and stoic. The silent standoff continued as Bucket pulled over and parked outside a house. The captive's house. They had not secured the chip from the man himself, so it was time for Plan B. Mickey lowered the binoculars he had been using to scope out the house and turned to address Bucket and JP. "Okay, men," he started. Bucket smiled. He loved it when Mickey project managed. "This is going to be a simple in and out operation. I've got a top-notch security system," the restrained man boasted. He was entirely unafraid. "Yeah, it's like Fort Knox, and you guys will never get past it." God damn it, JP thought. This guy was not taking him seriously. It was like he knew it was JP's first time, and he was just humouring the rookie, manoeuvring him into place before swooping in and taking his queen. JP felt panic start to rise in his throat. Mickey turned around and saw JP's face. He shot him a reassuring look before turning back to peer at the house again through the binoculars. "We'll see about that," he said, trying to boost JP's mood. Suddenly, a shadow moved across the front door. Mickey could see the shadow, a shape, through the binoculars. That shape was familiar. He knew it from somewhere. Where had he seen it before? "Wait a minute," he muttered. "There is someone guarding his front door." The shadow shape was gone as quickly as it appeared. Mickey searched again, trying to pinpoint the person casting the shadow. What? JP was shaken. This was not part of the plan. This was now officially Plan C. "What?" the restrained man copied mockingly. JP looked out of the van window, trying to see what was going on. The panic rose in his throat again when he saw the shape on the front door. It was definitely a somebody. Mickey turned to address the captive. "Who is that?" he demanded. The man paused, as if for dramatic effect. "That's my private guard." "Guard?" Mickey echoed, turning back to look again. Just then the shape came into view. JP suppressed a relieved laugh, but he couldn't help but smile. "Look, it's just a little boy doing the tricks and treats," he exclaimed with relief. "What?" Mickey said, still trying to locate the shape through the binoculars. "He's dressed like a munchkin," Bucket said, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There was a humanoid shape standing on the front steps, but it was dressed oddly. "Yes, he's..." JP started, before interrupting his own thought. "Wait, it's not Halloween night?" JP was trying to remember what he had learned about costume culture in his American Culture 101 classes. "It's Christmas Eve," Bucket said, mostly to himself. "Everybody just clam it," Mickey shouted. He had a tendency to become aggressive when plans went astray. He couldn't think with everyone yammering on, speaking at cross purposes, like white noise cancelling out his own voice's signal. If he could just take a moment to think and to observe, he was sure he could formulate a new plan. At his exclamation, the van fell into silence. Mickey took a deep breath in and slowly exhaled his stress and negative thoughts. "Okay," he thought, "you can do this." He looked back up at the house. He looked at the shape, and he saw red. "That's not a munchkin," Mickey whispered, the colour gone from his already pale face. "That, my friends, is a troll." JP was confused. He had not learnt this word before. He did not know how to react. "Troll?" the captive said dubiously. "What is a troll doing guarding your house on Christmas Eve?" demanded Mickey, turning to face the man. His lined face was a painting of terror and confusion. "That's my patrol troll," the man quipped. Patrol troll? Bucket was confused. This was very much not the plan. The plan did not include a patrol troll. The three men all looked at the front door from the plan and the unplanned shape in front of it. "Patrol troll," they all said, as if with one voice. Mickey was in a daze. He was on autopilot. "This is a game changer," he said emotionlessly. "Oh, what's the big deal?" Bucket started to bluster. "I'm not afraid of a troll." "You should be," Mickey yelled, and then shrunk back into his seat and whimpered. The van fell into a tense silence. JP still didn't know what a troll was, but he knew it was not the time to ask. Bucket looked across at the cowering man in the passenger seat. It was not the assertive, strong, experienced man that he had come to know so well. He had the same dark hair shot with silver, the same fading scars on his face and torso, but he was different somehow. It was the same slightly worn and rugged face, but with a completely unfamiliar expression. This was not a side of Mickey that Bucket had ever seen before. Mickey sighed. It was time to come clean. He had been riding with Bucket so long. His old life seemed like a memory of a dream that he thought he'd had. But, as his therapist had said, you can't barricade the door and then get angry that no one visits. If he wanted to progress this relationship, then he needed to start sharing more and giving more. Mickey gathered up his courage with his breath and then started the story he wished he could forget. Germany, he began. 1975. I was leading a Navy SEAL team on recon into East Germany. Here Mickey paused. He hadn't spoken about this for years, and the words were like sabres, tracing along the scar lines of his emotional wounds, severing the tissue again. He bit back tears. We came to a river near Mönckenberg. Mickey's eyes lost their focus, and he stared at nothing, and at everything. Bucket could see the story playing across his lover's face as clearly as if he was watching a film projected onto the great white expanse of Mickey's forehead. 8 men crossed that bridge. Mickey choked out. Only one came back. Bucket wanted to take Mickey in his strong, sculpted arms. He wanted to promise to make things right, to kiss away the pain forever. Of course, it was so like Mickey to choose the middle of a job to share the intimate details of his past, to fill in the blanks, to explain the cause of the unacknowledged distance between them. Bucket's sense of professionalism fought with his need to express his love. But before one could win out, the moment was cut short. "Which one, Mickey?" came a voice from behind them. Still raw from his sudden intrusive emotions, Mickey turned and glared at JP. He was frustrated at having his story interrupted. JP understood what that look meant. He had messed up again, and he let out a small "oh" as an apology. JP's inexperience with his second language had caused him to make a fool of himself again. Mickey knew it was not intentional, and that he should acknowledge the incredible accomplishments of JP to be able to live in a country where he was not fluent in the common language. He knew that JP's lack of nuance in his second language was no indication of his cognitive abilities. Rather, that he did not have the same experiences and opportunities as a native speaker would have had. In that moment, he could not spare any feelings for JP. Bucket, recognizing that the moment of true intimacy between them was in danger of dissipating into the evening air, tried to restart the conversation. "Really?" he hemmed. "Really?" he hawed. "One troll? 8 Navy SEALs? Oh, what were the other 7 Navy SEALs doing?" But Mickey had sunk too far into his memories. He lashed out at Bucket, or at his memories, or at the injustice of the world, or at all three. "Stop it, will you?" Mickey shouted, and the 3 other men were silent. After a moment, Mickey visibly shook himself and appeared to come back to the present. "We've got to regroup here and rethink this whole thing." Bucket nodded thoughtfully, but Mickey wanted action. "Get us out of here," he shouted, and he immediately regretted raising his voice. He looked sheepishly at Bucket, and the man pulled the car out and started to drive them away. He would need to make it up to his lover later. He would need to make sure that Bucket knew how appreciative he was for the support and understanding that Bucket gave so freely to him. "We need a hideout," Mickey suggested. The end.
Amazing.
Ah, dear. Scene 7, written by Suzanne. Ryan started awake at the sound, heart thudding, and heard Casey next door throw her blankets back and step out onto the rug. He was not up for being outbraved by a kid sister, and he shook himself free of his Chun-Li pillow and headed for the door. He took his foam baseball bat with him, dismissing the nagging voice, suggesting that a foam baseball bat would be no real use against any threat. He was marginally comforted by the fact Casey had brought her hockey stick out into the hall with her. They exchanged panicked looks, and simultaneously gasped as an audible click and crunch sounded from downstairs. Apparently, they hadn't secured the baubles as well as they'd thought. Casey was hyperventilating. Ryan waved at her in an impotent attempt at comfort, moving past her to head down the stairs first. Only marginally ruffled, the elf stood, dusting himself off, scratching at his jaw as he surveyed his new surroundings. Not bad, though haphazardly decorated and more than slightly dated. He cast a professional eye over the stockings on the mantelpiece. Dad, Ryan, Casey. The fourth hook stood empty, and the elf made a noise of profound understanding. He knew the language of stockings. That empty hook spoke volumes. Looking away, his eye fell to the cookies and milk, and he happily crossed the rug to reach for one. It was badly burnt. The elf dropped it back on the plate with an ugh of disgust, and with an irritated flick of a white-gloved hand, the plate jumped a little on the wooden surface, chiming as the burnt cookies settled back into their place, rejuvenated into perfect golden cookies, not a carcinogen in sight. He picked one up with a smug huff of self-congratulation. An inhuman squeaky roar broke from the landing, accompanied by thudding feet, and the elf succumbed to his instincts, dropping the cookie and bolting towards the window. A wayward loop of tinsel caught him, and he grappled with a suddenly violently swaying tree, being repeatedly smacked about the head with some kind of toy mallet. A smaller female voice chirruped from the doorway, "No, Ryan!" The tree buckled, and the elf squeaked in terror as it came toppling down on him. There was a moment of pain and intense disorientation, intensified by the intoxicating smell of pine needles and peppermint. His vision swam, and settled on the hideous older boy with the fake sporting implement, and the smaller and marginally more attractive girl. Faced with no better option, he panicked. "Ah, kids!" The girl offered a tremulous, gap-toothed smile. "Hi, my name's Casey." The boy's brow had furrowed, his upper lip curling. It was oily and hideous. "Who let you out of the chocolate factory?" "Hilarious. Hilarious!" The elf began angrily trying to wrestle his way upright. "I am not an Oompa Loompa, orange hacks. They'd as soon knife your mother as talk to you," and he was offended. "Then you're friends with Frodo?" Marginally better, but he considered his feat very attractive, and the blow to his self-esteem was a vicious one. "I'm not a hobbit." "Ryan, he's an elf." Unexpected wisdom from the stunted girl child. The boy narrowed his eyes. Freaky. The elf was up, irritated and insulted. "You two are little brats. That's what Santa calls you." The girl huffed, her bottom lip protruding. "He does not." The boy interceded, thankfully, since the elf had just realised that the girl carried a very real and very wooden hockey stick. "Wait, what are you doing here? Aren't you supposed to be in the North Pole making toys?" The elf covered his own confusion by fumbling for his pocket watch. Mix-up. Big mix-up. "See this distress beacon? Santa's going to come by and pick me up soon." The display blinked like a radar, a small warning blinking at the bottom warning him of a weak signal. "So go to bed, and when you wake up in the morning, you won't remember any of this even happened." He attempted a dignified exit, and half-dragged the tree by its tinsel across the rug. Shaking himself free, he stalked from the living room, and Ryan and Casey exchanged a look of bewilderment before he backtracked into view, looking peevish. "Where is the mistletoe in this house?" Casey blessedly set down her hockey stick. "Dad doesn't get it anymore. Not since Mum." The boy sneered, attempting a semblance of mannish bravado. "Nobody's going to be trying to kiss you." The elf muttered something indecipherable and definitely insulting. "I'm out of here." Ryan and Casey followed the stamping footsteps, perplexed and incredulous, watching him storm up the stairs and pausing at the landing, unsure what to do. Sensing his audience, he turned back, lifting a pudgy hand to his mouth. "Zip, zip, I was never here." "Wait!" Casey called. The elf turned away, and with a colossal clang he crumpled, flopping bonelessly down the stairs to roll to a halt at the children's feet. Grandma, brandishing a frying pan, hollered in victory from the top of the stairs. "Got the varmint!" Casey and Ryan gaped at her, Casey with increasing horror. "Grandma!"
Oh. Scene 8 by Luke. The barn door creaked open and the shadowy figure of Mickey snuck silently in. Despite having the build, looks, charisma and smarts of a slab of beef that had been chewed around the edges, Mickey was one hell of a creeper. Instead of watching TV, he'd wind down on evenings by breaking into a random house and watching the occupants sleep. Unfortunately, his companions weren't nearly as stealthy. Jean-Pierre and Big Bucket loudly clambered in behind him, dragging the frightened Eric with them. Whoa, 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 protested Mickey. What was the matter with these guys? This was a barn. Didn't they realize there could be a cow in here? Cows had big mouths. He flicked on the lights and was relieved to discover nothing but hay. All right, he conceded. We're clear. Big Bucket forced Eric into a handy office chair. Eric kept it in there so that he could sit in the barn and spin on it while his kids were asleep. It wasn't quite as fun now. If it's money that you want, I can take you to an ATM right now, blurted Eric desperately. At least he hoped it was just money. He had a sneaking suspicion that they were aiming to harvest his organs and fill his body up with hay. You think we're suckers? Yelled Mickey, pushing his ham-hock head closer to Eric. We know that chip is worth millions. Eric's heart sank. In fact, he'd rather give up his heart than his beloved invention. He fucking loved that chip. Maybe he could divert the crooks with some reverse psychology. I've got kids in that house, all right? Leave them out of this. They... Shut up, snapped Mickey. I don't want to hear another word from you. Otherwise, I'm gonna... Wait, what was he gonna do? Spin him aggressively in that chair? That looked like it would be kind of fun. Mickey gestured to JP for help, who obligingly ran his filthy French finger across his throat. Eric looked worried. Mickey was gonna cut JP's throat? Jesus, that's the last thing I want to do, thought Mickey. Mickey headed for the window and peered at the house with miraculously stashed binoculars. He took a deep breath. Alright, listen up, here's the plan. Big Bucket, you are going to take out all the landlines and cell towers all along this road. What? Said Big Bucket. It was as though Mickey had asked him to catch and tame a unicorn. Mickey continued. Then there was a convenience store that we passed a couple of miles away. Perking up at this, Jean-Pierre pulled a roll of paper out of his pocket. Ah, convenience store. The paper unraveled to reveal a very long list. Mickey, if I could just get a couple of items, a baguette, some onion dip, french fries, a racing magazine. Mickey snatched it from him angrily. To him it sounded more like JP had inconvenience in store. Just one item that you need to get, snarled Mickey, scratching out all that Frenchy bullshit on Jean-Pierre's list. And that is a can of this. Mystifyingly, he then passed the list to Big Bucket, who had already proven to be incapable of following instructions and was barely able to read. There were 2 new words on the list, scrawled in bold block letters. Troll off. Troll off? Questioned Bucket sarcastically. Do you want regular or extra strength? Scented or unscented? Eric sighed quietly. Don't talk about troll off as if it's a thing. Do they have extra strength? Queried Mickey. Tired and confused, Big Bucket shook his massive head and wandered out to the van. Was he supposed to be cutting landlines, cell towering, offing a troll, catching a unicorn? Maybe he'd just have a nap. Hurry up, called Mickey optimistically. Stay away from my house, interrupted Eric in another vain attempt to get them to go to his house. Oh, what? Growled Mickey. We're going to get past that troll and we're going to get that chip. It felt to Eric like he would never escape the endless loop of this conversation. None of the participants had any idea what the others were talking about. Jean-Pierre piped up to further prove this point. Ah, Mickey, we do not have to wait for Big Bucket, he said. What are you talking about, snapped Mickey. Although to be fair, he was intrigued. Waiting for Big Bucket to successfully complete his task would be like waiting for a rhinoceros to fall out of the clouds and start shitting gingerbread. I will gain entry by creating a ruse, explained JP, by pretending that I am a blue-collar electrician. Mickey was mortified. Wait, no one's going to buy a Frenchy repairman around here. What was he going to do, stick a frog's leg in the socket? Surrender immediately? Now, a Hispanic repairman, maybe. Jean-Pierre jovially bypassed Mickey's casual racism. But you do not realize, mon petit grand fromage, that I am the world's most recognized master of disguise. He flamboyantly waved around his arms, and for a moment there, Mickey was almost convinced that he was a duck. Imagine what he could do if he moved his legs around as well. A French repairman was ludicrous, but a duck repairman... Eric shuddered. Due to his own rampant neglect, his kids were so stupid that it just might work.
Grandma, with the help of Casey and Ryan, carried the unconscious stranger to the couch. Grandma felt sympathy for this midget, or what's the politically correct term dwarf these days, she can never remember, but she did feel guilty for hitting him so hard. He was probably just some struggling actor who found easy work at this time of year, although they didn't explain what he was doing at her son's home. Did Eric hire him as a surprise for her kids? That must be it. Oh, she really did feel terrible now. But just as she was about to call for an ambulance, something strange happened. At first, Grandma thought it was a trick of the light from the fireplace, but a bubble was definitely emerging from the unconscious man's mouth. It floated upwards, and she swore she saw what looked like a snow globe. Within it was the sickeningly sweet image of a little snowman holding a puppy. She exchanged a look with her grandchildren, and they too were equally stupefied. She looked back just as the bubble burst into dozens of snowflakes that fell gracefully on the dwarf's face. This caused him to stir. Slowly, he sat up and rubbed his eyes. When he took in his surroundings, the memories flooded back, and he was not happy. He pointed angrily at the old woman. "Are you the one that hit me?" Grandma felt so ashamed she could do nothing but shrug and look away. Ryan cut in, "Do that thing with the bubble. I'll get my video camera. We'll get a zillion hits." "No, Ryan," Casey protested. "He's like Santa Claus. No one's allowed to see him. It's a special thing, just for us, right?" she asked the elf, her eyes wide with wonderment. "Yeah," said the elf. He wasn't really listening until Casey added, "I wish for him to come and help us." The elf sat alert. "Whoa, what did you just say?" "I made a wish on this doll, like Grandma said," the little girl explained. Grandma seemed convinced by this sound reasoning. "Isn't that remarkable?" "Let me see it," the elf demanded. "Yeah, I made him." "He must be a very old elf," Grandma said to her grandchildren. The elf made no remark. He was staring off mournfully. "Thanks, Santa," he said under his breath as he returned the doll to Casey. There's a lot of weight to those two words. Thanks indeed for centuries of enslavement, for the devastating destruction of the elf tribes, the only indigenous population of the Arctic. Father Christmas had once been a beloved member of Henry VIII's court. He was extremely kind and generous, and he was tasked with the spreading of Christmas cheer every December. So beloved was he that his spirit ascended to become the mythical figure that humans know today. But his benevolence did not spread beyond mankind. Non-humans, like elves and reindeer, were merely means to an end, exploiting their inherent supernatural qualities. The only conceivable end to this exploitation was the cessation of the celebration of the complete and utter destruction of mankind. Suddenly, the elf snapped back to the present. So, here's the deal, the elf explained. Child makes a wish upon the elf doll, toys, cash and small bills, whatever. The elf's supposed to grant the wish before Santa comes back to pick him up by daybreak. So, what did you wish for? "I wish for my family to be happy again," said Casey. It's kind of vague. "And for Daddy to come home. I can make that happen." Grandma looked over at the clock. "He was supposed to be home over 2 hours ago." "Where'd he go?" asked the elf. "He went into town to see a lady, and he's not back yet." Ryan rolled his eyes. He knew full well why his dad might not be coming home tonight. He just had to keep his mouth shut for Casey's sake. "Oh, a lady, huh? So, if I get your dad back, then we're good?" "I guess," said Casey. "Done deal." Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. "See, that's how I roll," the elf exclaimed, as he proudly sat back in the chair, hands behind his head. Did Dad forget his key? Ryan wondered aloud as he headed to the front door with Casey and Grandma. "Dad's always come home," the elf erroneously stated, having absolutely no real understanding of the behavior of human fathers. Ryan opened the door to find Amy dressed warmly against the cold winter night. "It's just you," Ryan said, barely containing his disappointment. Amy ignored his reaction and cheerfully said, "Merry Christmas," only for Ryan to slam the door in her face. Grandma was shocked at her grandson's behavior. "Ryan James Harper, you open that door instantly." And he did, begrudgingly. "Oh my word, I am so sorry. Who are you?" "The butcher lady." "The butcher lady," Ryan said in a way that was colder and more bitter than the weather outside. Casey elaborated. She was much more enthused about their visitor than her older brother was. "Oh, Eric's friend," Grandma explained. "Hello, won't you come in?" My voice is breaking, and it's really hard to keep straight. Okay. Amy entered and offered a tray of meat and cheese. "I'm so sorry, the store was closed, but I brought cold cuts," she said apologetically. "Thanks." Casey stepped forward and took the tray. Instead of placing it on the nearby coffee table, she raced off further into the house carrying the tray. This struck Amy as kind of odd, but then again she didn't have much experience with children, so she said nothing of it. Casey wasted no time in reaching the living room. So singularly focused was she on this task that the tray had somehow gotten lost somewhere along the way. "It's not my dad, it's the butcher," she explained as she dragged the elf off the couch by his arm. "Huh?" he said blankly. "Quick, hide upstairs," she said as she continued to lead him. She said as she continued to lead him. Still standing in the hallway, Amy was making small talk with Ryan. "I hope I'm not intruding. Eric, your dad, he invited me." "Dad's not? Oh, he's not dressed yet. I'm Grandma Harper. Ryan, take her coat. Please come in." As Amy handed her coat, scarf, and hat to Ryan, she couldn't help but notice how chaotic the house looked. Broken boxes strewn everywhere, the Christmas tree lay on its side. Grandma looked sheepishly at the mess. "Oh, that darn cat makes a mess of everything." "We don't have a cat," Ryan mumbled under his breath. Why was Grandma being so accommodating to Amy? He waited until he was alone to dump the coat, hat, and scarf on the floor. Upstairs, meanwhile, Casey was hiding the elf in the bathroom. "Stay here, make noises like my dad." "Hey, that's not part of the deal. Just do it, I'm in charge of you." Gah! Could the elf ever catch a break? There was always someone in charge of him. This kid was bossy. By comparison, she made Santa seem kind and fair. But he was obligated to obey her, at least for now. So he looked around the bathroom for something to do. He usually sings in the shower. "I'm tone deaf." "Sing!" she commanded as she pulled the door closed. Grandma was leading Amy down the hall, all the while trying to distract her from yet more clutter and mess strewn everywhere. "Do you like eggnog, dear?" "Oh, yes, yeah, I do." "Ryan, show Amy a place to sit by the fire," Grandma asked as she walked out to the kitchen. "Everything's so, Christmassy." Amy tried once more to chat with Ryan. Ryan said nothing. Instead, he flopped himself on the couch and pointed to the seat opposite for Amy with unmasked disdain. As she took her seat, Casey joined her brother's side. "Hi," Amy said sweetly. Even Casey didn't respond to her, but at least she gave a little smile. Otherwise, the three of them sat in awkward silence. Silence, save for the noise coming from upstairs. The elf was frantically trying everything to seem occupied. He turned on the hairdryer and pointed at his face. He turned on all the taps. Then he decided on the hairdryer again. And to top it all off, he switched on the electric toothbrush. The elf had no real idea of what filthy humans did in bathrooms. He had never once bathed in his long life. Elves were magical creatures after all. Then he remembered to sing, so he chose the song that had been going through his mind most of the time, at least since the mid-19th century, "Deck the Halls." Despite being so familiar with the song, it definitely did not sound right when it came out of his mouth. And downstairs, Amy gave a bemused look. "My dad really can't sing," was all Casey said, as deadpan as she could. Distraction came in the form of Grandma entering with a plate of cookies, burned entirely black. She offered them to Casey, who politely accepted, but as she went to take a cookie, she looked over at the children. Casey shook her head, while Ryan seemed to encourage her to eat it. Not wanting to seem rude, she took a bite, and continued to try and bite. It was as solid as a rock. Grandma was looking at her expectantly, so Amy decided to place the whole thing in her mouth. That was the best course of action. "Oh yeah, I can never make that she said as her nose and throat were filling with the aroma of what might have actually been burnt hair. At least Grandma seemed satisfied. Once the charcoal cookie was dissolved a bit in her mouth, she asked for some eggnog. At least that might wash this foul taste out of her mouth. "Of course, dear." Grandma was more than happy to oblige. It's not often that she saw anyone enjoying her cooking. The moment her back was turned, Amy pulled the horrid cookie out of her mouth and tossed it into the fire, as if it were a ring into Mount Doom. The flames suddenly grew twice their size. Perhaps the metaphor was more apt than she had thought. The children laughed as she jumped back into her seat in surprise. She smiled weakly. How much longer was Eric going to take? If someone were to have opened the bathroom door at that minute, they would have seen nothing but steam and heard a disembodied voice singing Christmas carols in an increasingly strained voice. Grandma returned with a creamy glass of eggnog. "Here you go, dear. I make my eggnog with turkey eggs and buttermilk. I hope you like it." It didn't look so threatening, at least not as bad as the cookies. She wanted nothing more to get rid of that taste, so Amy took the glass, sniffed it, and gave another glance at the kids. Once more, Casey looked concerned, where Ryan sat on the edge of his seat with sadistic anticipation. What they knew, and she didn't, was that Grandma's cooking was the cause of their grandfather's unexpected and undignified death. Having not learned her lesson the first time, she took a sip and immediately regretted having done so. Casey began sympathetically gagging, while Ryan looked positively elated. As much as she tried, she could not will herself to force it down, so she tried to spit it out back into the glass as subtly as she could, which is to say, not subtle at all. Grandma looked shocked. "Oh, I'm sorry, was it sour?" Grandma did not believe in expiry dates, which were still a relatively new concept to her. Unfortunately, she also lacked much of a sense of smell, or taste, or vision, for that matter. Amy gave a polite laugh while coughing. "No, it's fine, it just came out the wrong pipe." Casey and Ryan broke into laughter. They would break her eventually, and Dad would be forever alone, just as they always wanted. Mother had always told them what to do and ruin their fun, while their father was always more occupied with his work, leaving them free to do whatever they wanted. While Amy seemed nice now, Ryan convinced Casey that it was only a matter of time before she became their new mummy, and she would take away their freedom.
Yeah, Courtney.
Shit got dark.
Chapter 10, written by Zach, read by Paris. Big Bucket was a man of many talents. He once constructed a life-size replica of Sigourney Weaver out of toothpicks. In Year 7, he burped an entire national anthem, and at this very moment, he was reciting the lyrics to a very hip-hop Christmas, while eating a burger and driving a van. Truly a genius beyond his years. He saw the lights flickering in the mirror before the siren managed to make its way over the heavy bass. A lot of emotions ran through his mind as he pulled the car over to the side of the road, all of which could be summed up with the simple word, fuck. He sat patiently as the police car idled behind him, its bright lights blocking out the face of the man in the driver's seat. Why was he taking so long? Was this a scare tactic? Was he running the plates? Was he just having trouble with his belt? Perhaps the buckle was stuck or had wrapped around one of the objects on his belt. The gun, perhaps, or the baton? Surely he could loosen its grip and get it off. Maybe the latch had broken. The answer to Big Bucket's questions all came to the same inevitable answer. An answer that said with the correct inflection could answer most questions he or anyone else has to ask. Fuck. Officer Schlub stepped out of the car. He pulled a cigarette out and lit it, taking much longer than he had to. His hand fell down to the side, resting on the handle of his .47 Magnum. Not police issued, but he'd bought it personally as he was a big fan of Dirty Harry. He let the cigarette hang from his lips as he stared into the distance. He sauntered over to the car, with every step a distinct ch-ch, like a cowboy from an old western. The sound came from some loose coins in his pocket, and was a complete coincidence, as, however, Officer Schlub was wearing the standard police-issue boots. Comfortable, ergonomic, and most importantly, affordable, as the local police station had been suffering with their budget lately. Mrs. Porter, a receptionist for 35 years, mother of three, and local award-winning pie baker, had recently been let go, as well as the free Coke machine that sat in the lunchroom. Most painfully, though, was the forced retirement of Officer Schnauz. The firing itself was quite straightforward, as the captain gave the exact same speech to everyone he fired. Unfortunately, as Officer Schnauz was a German shepherd, he didn't understand the conversation he was having. Somewhere in there, though, Schnauz must have gotten a hint as he mauled the captain's leg before peeing on everything as they escorted him out of the building. He lives with a nice family a few suburbs away now in a big house with a huge garden, enjoying his retirement. Mrs. Potter lives on the street. The economy. Schlub arrived at the window. He removed his flashlight and tapped it on the window for attention. His cigarette still hanging from his lip. Big Bucket turned the music down and opened the window. "Evening, officer," he said, as he looked out, noticing where Schlub's hand rested on his weapon. "You know you got a tail light out on this thing," Schlub said with no emotion. "No, sir." Bucket's words lingered in the air as two men sized each other up. Schlub had the demeanour of a nice, friendly, good-natured man, but there was something in his eyes that screamed, "I killed a man and I'll do it again!" Schlub stepped back from the car, his grip tightening on his gun. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to take you down to the station," he said, as he readied himself to withdraw his weapon. "Oh, man," Bucket said as he realised his world was about to come crashing down around him. He nodded and accepted his fate, until out of the corner of his eye he saw the tools he had lying on the seat next to him. Hope rushed back to him. Could he grab it and fight his way before Schlub had got a shot off? Maybe he could throw a large Coke Zero that was sitting in his drink holder at Sloop's face. Off chance he was allergic to artificial sweeteners. Big Bucket had given up real sugar months ago and fears that one day he'd develop diabetes. No. What if he wasn't allergic to sweeteners? It was a very slim chance after all. The tools, it was his only chance. Maybe, just maybe, he could get out of this situation with his life. Bucket readied himself to grab the weapon and make his move when the deep rumblings of Schlub's laugh filled the air. You should have seen your face! Bucket froze, unsure of what was happening. I got you hook, line and sinker. Bucket awkwardly laughed along with Schlub, who continued to laugh at his own joke. Yeah, you got me, officer. Bucket, still unsure what was happening, stared at Schlub. It's Christmas Eve. You go and have a good evening, okay? Schlub suddenly stopped laughing. His face turned to pure anger, the kind of action you would see in a pure psychopath. And get that taillight fixed. I sure will, Bucket said with a smile. What's all that? Schlub said as he raised his torch onto the passenger seat. The tools Bucket had thought about using to fight lay spread across the seat. Bucket panicked. He thought about trying to make up a story that would explain it, but why lie? He reached across and picked up a large, sharp pair of wire cutters, holding it as if he were wielding a knife. Okay, I'm gonna level with you, yeah. I can't go back to the joint. I skipped my parole hearing last week and now I'm hanging out with criminals. A moment of silence lingered in the air as the two men sized each other up again. This van is stolen. All the stuff is shoplifted. We kidnapped a scientist to steal his invention, just to sell it for money. Yeah, I've been driving around cutting down phone lines and knocking down cell towers, and we got this guy tied up in a barn. The scientist guy is tied up in a barn. Silence filled the air between the two men again as Bucket slowly opened the car door and stepped out. Schlub stepped back, creating a little bit of distance between the two of them. Sliding the safety off his gun, he flicked the cigarette down at Bucket's feet. The two men stood facing each other, ready for whatever came next. I can take you there right now. We can rescue the guy. We can be heroes. You want to be a hero? He said with a bitter hiss. Schlub looked at Bucket with contempt. He could do it. He could get a shot off before Bucket knew what was happening. The part of his mind that screamed, I'll kill again, was delighted. Another voice in his head, we really need a pee. And another wondered what happened to Bo Peep in Toy Story 3. Did she die? I feel like she died. She was porcelain. Maybe she broke. Wow, that movie was heartbreaking. That bit where they all think they're gonna die and hold hands is horrible. That was fucked. So very fucked. It was a kid's movie, damn it. Movie. Camera. The police dash cam. Damn it. He couldn't be filmed shooting someone on the side of the road with his own personal gun. Schlub began to laugh like a crazy man, lifting his hands in the air as if this had been part of some elaborate joke. Payback time. You got me. You're good. Is Jimmy Hoffa down in that barn too? He said as he continued his crazed laugh. Whatever this was, it was over. Bucket chuckled. Yeah, he's down there too. The tone of his voice, a strong warning to Schlub that Bucket wasn't afraid to kill if he had to. You had me going. All right, big man, you deliver them flowers, Schlub said as he turned around, banging his hand on the florist sign plastered on the side of the van. Schlub took a few steps back before freezing and turned his head and stared at Bucket. Merry Christmas, he said in a way that implied a distinct fuck you. Yeah, and a happy new year, Bucket replied with the exact same implication. Two men got back into their cars. Schlub sat silent for a moment. That was close. Too close, he thought. What was he thinking? He knew better to act like that when he was on the job. He had to rein it in. He was a police officer. Next time someone saw him, that's all they would see. He would make sure of that. Bucket sat waiting in the car for Schlub to leave. He started his engine and watched as the police car drove off. Pea-brain, he said under his breath as he turned his music back up and headed off down the road.
Wow.
Amazing.
Well
That was so great.
All I said was don't make me swear.
I know, you swore. Scene 11. Luke. Can I help you? Asked Grandma commendably coherently. There in the open door stood John Pierre, cunningly disguised as a typical dumbass American redneck electrician, his overalls stained, his arms overflowing with cables and tools. Oh, howdy, madam, he exclaimed, affecting the uncouth gibberish of the wretched local buffoons who had mocked him since his arrival from France. My name is, Hank. Inside he withered. In his mouth the name tasted like plasticky yellow cheese and grease. Mr. Harper asked me to come look at the faulty wiring in his laboratory. But, said Grandma, who was thinking about butts, I'll show this ignorant fool, thought Jean-Pierre. I will harness the very spirit of America. Stars and stripes will roll off my tongue. It will be as if a bald eagle was taking me from behind. Then I will mosey on down to holler with my hound doggies and hunt the opossum, drink moonshine in my big muddy truck with the overgrown tires. He spat on the ground for effect. Yeah, maybe it was too much. Maybe he was coming off as too articulate and refined compared to the average Yank. Tonight, dribbled Grandma? I mean, where on earth is Eric? She wondered if he was on Earth, or was he on Mars? Oh, he got tied up, grinned Jean-Pierre in his caustic drawl, but don't worry, he insisted that I take care of this tonight so that your house does not burn to the ground and ruin your all's Christmas. Grandma was easily led. I warned him about that. I told him it was dangerous to do those experiments up there. Kept her up at night, the thought of all that fire and all those Frankensteins. Don't worry, madam, assured JP. I will take care of everything. Ah, well, said Grandma, instantly dismissing her sheer terror. I'm sure you know where it is. And with that, she wandered off down the corridor, wondering where she was. Even JP was baffled. Of course I do know where it is, he lied. He sure didn't bank on the time it would take for him to search out a laboratory in a 3-bedroom house. Grandma's disorientation landed her in the living room. Who was that, Grandma? Asked Ryan, who was clearly a terrible eavesdropper. It's the electrician, intoned Grandma in a rare moment of lucidity. He's here to fix something in your dad's lab. Hopefully that ungodly experiment he calls his son. On Christmas Eve? Asked Ryan suspiciously. He wasn't sure Jesus would be a fan of that. I'm sure he'll charge a pretty penny for it, said Grandma, who was blissfully unaware of the last few decades of inflation. Upstairs, JP crept down the corridor, his expression souring at the row of family photos on the wall. This family is like the filling of a sandwich, thought Jean-Pierre, which is to say they're all inbred. The very thought of this made him urgently want to shit, so he grabbed for the bathroom door, oblivious to the fact that the clouds of steam were seeping underneath it. On the other side, the steamy elf slammed the door shut on him. Bam! Downstairs, Amy looked up from her Sudoku. Casey and Ryan looked at each other worried. If that elf was having a shit fit up there, then it was time to get the fuck out. Jean-Pierre bent down to peer through the keyhole. Perhaps there was a naked broad in there. Instead, he was met with a wicked little eyeball. He jumped back. Oh, he was hoping for a couple of big French baps. No matter. He turned back to the only remaining door, which now had to be the lab, and jimmied it open loudly with a knife. What kind of an electrician is he? Pondered Amy downstairs. She was beginning to suspect that he was the kind who would jimmy a door open with a knife. Cautiously, she crept to the bottom of the stairs. Eric, she called? Because wouldn't it be a funny coincidence if the electrician's name was also Eric? The only response was a loud clang. A knifey electrician who spoke only in clangs? This Amy had to see for herself. She stormed up the stairs, anticipating a stabbing. Casey and Ryan followed. Jean-Pierre was already sniffing around the lab as though it was made of fine wine. Ah, I know you are here, my little chip. I can smell you. You smell good. In his chip frenzy, subterfuge was out the fucking window. When I find you, I caress you, use you for myself. He hated to admit it, but that bathroom thing had made him horny. While, back in the bathroom, a certain elf had begun boisterously singing Deck the Halls, causing the passing Amy to pause. Eric, it's Amy, she called, rapping on the door. Her inability to recognize her lover's voice was further proof that their relationship was entirely physical. The singing continued. Was Eric in pain? In all of their trysts, she had insisted that Eric do her from the back, so she didn't have to look at him. So not knowing if he was showering, committing suicide, or wrestling a turd, Amy respectfully covered her eyes and entered the bathroom. Lucky, or she would have seen the tragic side of an ungainly little elf waving around his sausagey little limbs in a mockery of a dance. I think there's something going on upstairs, I think, said Amy, who was upstairs and right in the thick of it. Cheekily, the elf darted out behind her. Amy bristled, but when she opened her eyes, there was nothing there. What's going on in this house? In the lab, Jean-Pierre was so worked up about the chip he was about to unzip and let rip when the elf broke his concentration by barreling in towards him. JP jumped. The troll! Ha! The gnarled little fucker was all piss and vinegar now. Who are you? He said menacingly, and what are you doing? Wait, you're not a troll, gasped JP. You're a leprechaun. Now who's foolish for studying mythology? The elf's face reddened. He gnashed his foul teeth. JP looked wistfully at the ceiling. For my first wish, I, the pudgy elf, charged, hitting JP like a little sack of shit. Amy turned towards the sudden explosion of violence. In the lab, JP regained his little senses. Who did this little bugger think he is? I'm a big man. He's built like a 3-year-old. I could snap this little sausage monster over my manly knee. I didn't have to put up with this nonsense. He gripped the elf by his fanciful collar and slammed him onto the desk. Where is the chip? I don't know, squealed the elf. Hey, Amy bellowed. She was in the room now, brandishing a discarded antenna menacingly. You're not an electrician, she finally twigged. Then she saw the elf who had taken this opportunity to latch onto JP's back like an uglier Yoda. And who are you? Gasped Amy. The air sizzled with creepy elf magic, and suddenly JP and the elf burst clean out the window where they hovered outside, the latter still clanging to the former's back. This is not what I wished for, moaned Jean-Pierre, feeling the skin slowly separate from his spine. Twisting his body free of the elf's sharp yellow nails, he dropped to the ground, past the delighted faces of the children, who watched through the window, and into a pile of leaves, which were unfortunately masking a sprinkler. The elf, viewing Amy's horrified face, dropped quickly out of view. She screamed and ran back down the stairs. JP agonizingly pulled himself to the feet, but the little yellow claws were immediately upon his legs. His pants, already unbuttoned from the chip incident, slid clean off him. The elf grappled his pants bounty while Jean-Pierre ran screaming down the street, his penis flapping in the wind. Big Bucket awoke from the van and quickly drove JP away. Wait, thought the elf. I'll never fit into these pants. It mattered not. Amy came shrieking out of nowhere, yanking the elf by his now forlorn collar and waving a blood-stained cleaver in his horrible face. Not so fast. She'd chop him up in a heartbeat. She'd done worse before. The townsfolk would vomit if they knew what sorts of things she sold in her shop. They all looked the same on the inside. Squirrels, cats, unwanted pregnancies, mints, masks, all sins. You must be the butcher, gasped the elf. Kicking and screaming, she dragged him inside.
Oh my god.
Chapter 12, written by Zach and read by Paris. The first known barn was established in the Triassic period by a friendly triceratops called Jim. At least that's what my gut is telling me. The barn Mickey, Eric and Jean-Pierre stood in was not that barn. A guy called Dave, who was neither a dinosaur or friendly, had built it in 2003. He was what most people refer to as a complete twat, but that's irrelevant. Mickey, loitering in front of Eric, who was tied to a chair, sadly not in a sexy, fun way. Troll or leprechaun or whoever's guarding your house is not going to stand between us or our pot of gold. Eric looked at Mickey with disgust. Surely it's a little bit racist to assume that a short person is a leprechaun and that there's a pot of gold to be stolen, he thought as he looked at Mickey, dead in the eyes. Give it up, Mickey. You'll never get past the troll, he said, trying to avoid the whole leprechaun situation. Oh yeah, Mickey laughed as he stroked the long phallic object that ran down inside of his pants. Was Eric being tied to the chair about to get unexpectedly sexy? Mickey reached in and pulled it out. It was big and firm. Mickey smiled with pride. It was a spray can. Mickey spun it around and showed Eric the label. It was from a company called Go Away Spray that had been established in 1966 with their first and best spray, shark repellent. Eric looked surprised and bemused. You can make this easy on yourself by just telling me where that $1 billion chip is hidden, Mickey said, waving the can around. Outside the barn, Elfman looked through a broken window effortlessly. He'd done this before and mastered the technique early in his life. We're going to tear that sweet little house of yours apart, splinter by splinter, kids or no kids, Mickey yelled, trying to scare Eric into giving him the chip. You touch one hair on my children's head, you'll regret it, Eric said, knowing full well that he would do what he would do to Mickey if he ever got the chance. Stuff. He would do stuff. Mean stuff. The two men stared at each other. An uneasy silence filled the air. The sound of bottles smashing cut through the silence like a chainsaw cuts an apple. What was that? Jean-Pierre screamed. Maybe it was a visitor, Mickey said, thinking he sounded really cool and menacing. It didn't. He began to shake his can of spray and walked over to the door, then slowly opened it. Not because they wanted to open it slow, but because Dave, the fuckwit who made this barn, had put the wrong size door in, so you had to push extra hard and dragged on the ground. Fucking Dave. Mickey and his gang headed out the barn together. Here, little trolley, coming out, little green man, come on. Let's just talk about this. What do you say, huh? Come on out, troll. Elfman had been hiding behind some boxes near the door, and as Mickey and the gang made their way past him, he seized this opportunity. He made a break for the door. Mickey spun around just in time to see him get inside. There he is, he screamed as Elfman slammed the door, locking it from the inside. Hey, open the door, open up, Mickey cried out. The sound of the doors banging and people screaming gained Eric's attention. It was that or stare at the floor. He looked up and saw Elfman walking over to him. He was short in stature and dressed like Christmas had thrown up on him, but there was something about him that screamed, "I can kick myself in the head just like Wee Man from Jackass." You're Eric said with disbelief. "Don't say it." Don't say it. "But don't say it. You're an elf." "Thank you," he said in a way that sounded very much like "fuck you." "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to rescue you." "Ah," Eric said as he started to laugh with relief. Elfman ran over to the workbench trying to find something to cut Eric free. "It's a long story about a little girl who wished upon an elf doll," he said as he dug around the toolbox. "Casey," Eric yelled with excitement. "Yeah." Elfman found what he was looking for and headed back to the chair. He started to saw through the ropes. "I knew it all those years I spent believing it, and then I grew up. I suppose... But you really exist." Eric still couldn't quite believe who he was talking to. A real-life elf, or some weird short guy who thought he was an elf. Either way, he was happy that someone had come to help him. "If we don't get out of here, neither of us are going to exist," Elfman said, a grim reminder of their situation. The doors flew open, which shouldn't have happened because Elfman had locked it, but Dave, the world's shittiest contractor, had also fucked up the locks. What a dick. Mickey and Jean-Pierre burst through the door, the two of them ready for whatever situation was about to befall them. Elfman sized the two men up and threw his saw at the ground, running over to the table and picking up a sickle, a much more deadly weapon. As he picked up the sickle, it began to shake and glow before exploding into a large beach ball. Elfman reached for something else, but he picked up the hammer and it turned into a large lollipop. Everyone was confused. Mickey and Jean-Pierre laughed at Elfman as he struggled to find anything he could use as a weapon before it turned into a harmless novelty. He picked up the ball and threw it at the two men, using the distraction to escape and hide the tears he had in his eyes due to embarrassment. It didn't work. They kicked the ball out of the way and chased after Elfman. Elfman managed to loop around the door, Jean-Pierre and Mickey not far behind him. Elfman turned and kicked the bottom of a row of shelf. Luckily, Dave had a side job of constructing cabinets that were also low quality, and the rickety pieces of crap they wobbled and cracked before falling on top of Mickey and Jean-Pierre. Over the debris of the shelf, Elfman looked at Eric. "I tried," he said before disappearing out the door, leaving Eric in the barn. Elfman ran through the snow, picking up a plank of wood that had fallen off the barn. Fucking Dave. Using his magic, the elf turned the plank into a snowboard. A sudden drift of wind came from behind them, bringing with it snow and ice and one little squirrel who got swept up out of a tree. The ground in front of him turned into a big snow slope. "Hey!" Big Bucket, the third in Mickey's posse, had been sitting in his van. He tried to open the door, but the wind and snow pelted it shut. Elfman slid along the icy ground, picking up speed, lights appearing in front of him to help guide the way, just like that Coldplay song. The barn shook as the snowstorm Elfman had summoned roared on outside. It shouldn't have shook, but as previously mentioned, Dave is a proper twat. "We're not dealing with a troll or leprechaun," Mickey said as he climbed out from under the shelves. "This is something far more evil." "Like what?" Jean-Pierre asked, still stuck under the shelf. "What night is it?" Mickey asked, trying to free JP. "Christmas Eve. And who helps with the presents on the sleigh? Pointy ear, help Santa, and Jean-Pierre still confused. "An elephant? It's a Christmas elf," Mickey snapped, tired of Jean-Pierre's stupidity. Ripping the shelf off him and helping him up. "I'm gonna squash that pointy-eared pipsqueak like a bug," Big Bucket yelled as he burst through the door, the icy wind blowing behind him. "You say that, but you'll be singing another tune once he puts his big bony elbow in your eye," Jean-Pierre said, stepping up to Big Bucket, trying to start a fight. "Wait," Mickey screamed, trying to quell the confrontation. "He's right, you know," Eric said. "He's a Christmas elf with special powers. He's come to rescue my family." Mickey, throwing his can of spray away, slowly strode across to where Eric was tied. No, don't you be playing your little mind games with me. We're going in and we're getting that chip." Mickey pulled on the ropes, tying Eric down, tightening them. "You'll never get past the elf," Eric mustered up, trying not to show the pain he was in. "Oh yeah," Mickey said as he walked away from Eric, reaching into his jacket and pulling out his wallet. "You think I haven't dealt with elves before?" Out of eyeshot, Mickey opened his wallet. A small black and white photo of a young man and a young short woman in love was in there. It was a photo of Mickey and his first and only woman he'd ever loved, an elf named Mary. His eyes welled up as he remembered the person he'd once been and the woman he asked to marry him before. "Bucket, with me. JP, watch him," Mickey said as he stormed out of the barn with anger. Bucket followed with a sick, sadistic smile on his face. JP stood silent in the barn watching over Eric as the snowstorm stopped and building stopped shaking. A rafter towards the back of the barn came loose and fell off. Eric and Jean-Pierre jumped. Fucking Dave.
Dave's my favourite character.
Chapter 13, written by Hector Weenis, read by Jacinta. Amy helped Ryan half-carry the fully disgusting little half-creature inside. She wasn't sure what to make of it. Roughly the size of a child, but with disturbingly twinkling eyes, buck teeth, little apple dumpling cheeks, and prominently pointed ears. She'd once worked a summer down at that hospital on the hospital from the fucking room, scrubbing bedpans and kneading Charlie horses for a bunch of... Oh, fuck you, Callum. for a bunch of... But for a bunch of handicaps of varying descriptions, would it have killed these people to grunt a thank you once in a while? Anyway, she liked it. Anyway, she liked to think she knew a disabled to look at one, and this little fucker had the disabled... Oh, no! Oh, this is why you should have let me read it before I read it. Okay, alright. Anyway, she liked to think she knew a disabled to look at one, and this little fucker had the disabled in his face. In his face bones, but bad. Was he another one of Eric's brood of bastards? It might explain a few things. His face hit a pickup on her obviously blistering hot musk and blatant sexual signals, his altogether infuriating absent-mindedness and wretched stammerism, and his too disturbing obsession with ham. Perhaps having to confine such a... just stop scrolling. Perhaps having to confine such a pitiable, godless wretch as this inside his family home was taking a toll on poor Eric, cooping it from the prying eyes of the neighbours and the townsfolk, hiding it away to save it from the pitchfork tongs of the inevitable angry mobs. Perhaps, or then again, perhaps Eric's genes weren't right. Maybe whatever he was firing out down there was just plain wrong. Maybe she, a sexy, single, sexual woman, should have been more hesitant in entering a situation such as this, bringing her fallow, hairless fields within range of Eric's dubious ploughing implements. She was interrupted in her reverie. Did you find Eric? Grandma asked the thing. Amy gave a start. What the fuck? They talked to it just like it was people? Yeah, bad guys have him tied up to a chair at that old barn, it replied. Oh shit, it talked back! Amy gave another start. She guessed this was why it got to stay at home and not at that hospital on Guerrero Street she'd only just mentioned to herself. Then it dawned on her. Eric isn't here? On Christmas Eve? After finally having grown the sack to even ask me over to his damn house? Instead, it sounded like he was playing kinky S&M slap-ass in some location she'd for sure be asking for further details about. Leaving her with these Harper family buzzkills and their freak-faced playdate sibling, she still wasn't sure about the genealogy here. Ugh. What the hell am I even doing in this dump, she asked herself. She agreed to come along for one thing and one thing only. She was a sucker for a free Christmas ham, and this particular one was a doozy. She'd selected, killed, and prepared this one herself, and quite an uppity sow it had been too. Stupid pig, thinking it was too good for her. Still, maybe that one thing only bit isn't quite true, she conceded. She'd been looking forward to having a go on this Mr. Eric Harper. He had a weird Jason Bateman vibe about him, and she did have a regular bed-drenching night fantasies about shooting Teen Wolf from a helicopter. It was at this point she realised people were staring at her. How would a normal person react to this? Is he alright? She asked. No, he's tied up by bad guys. I hate you, Callum. The little disabled screeched with some insistence. Bad guys. She fought the urge to roll her eyes. This was some Z-grade family Christmas movie kind of shit right here. She wondered briefly how the McAllisters would have dealt with hijinks like these. Now there was a family that knew a thing or two about child abandonment. In the midst of her ponderment, the little freak made a sudden movement towards the stairs. The kids cut him off. "You just left him there?" Casey asked incredulously. Deal was, find him. I found him. Wish granted, it replied. Now I'm going out on the roof to wait for my ride. Amy assumed this was some sort of metaphor. "You promised to bring my daddy back," squawked Casey. "I make toys," it said. "That's all I know. That's all I'll ever be good for." "Go ahead, leave," shouted Ryan. "We can take care of ourselves." "We don't need quitting around here," added Grandma. It paused, regarded them all with its overly large almond-shaped eyeballs. Amy gave an involuntary shudder as they alighted on her. "I've done all I can do," it fumed, before petulantly adding, "I'm done!" And with that it stormed away in the direction of the upstairs landing. Well, that's that, thought Amy. She slipped a hand in her pocket and toyed with the little plastic baggie within. Now what am I supposed to do with 2 grams of goddamn trucker crank? She bought it off Chris R. that very afternoon. From the stoop there down from the local high school, total skis ball too, wearing a tight black sports singlet in the depths of December, even had the temerity to ask where his fucking money was, all while she was placing it face down in the centre of his palm. Of course her assumption had been that Eric would need a little such something to get that permanently distracted pecker of his up and running. God knows nothing else had worked at this point. She found it hard to fathom how any man could not come running when they had seen the things her hands could do with a tray of cold dead meat. But running Eric had not come, and now here she was, stuck with these little jerkwads and their jerkwad grammar. But, she had a sudden thought, there's no reason this night has to be a total write-off, no reason at all. Amy whipped around, upended her bag of noxious crank onto the first open receptacle, which happened to be Grandma's near-poisonous batch of eggnog. She gave it a rough stir, deposited equally into 3 available glasses, whipped back with the glasses in her hands. "A toast," she cried, "to your absent father. May he come back to us anon." Except she pronounced anon as anog, because that was hilarious, and despite the very real possibility that she was a borderline monster, she was still only human. The children took their proffered glasses somewhat reluctantly. Grandma accepted hers with the good grace of the elderly. Amy gathered her own nog back up from where she left it and joined in the toast. Her eyes opened wide, wider, and then even wider as she scrutinised Casey and Ryan struggling to choke down the buttery, eggy foulness of the mixture. They struggled, but they managed, and eventually they were done. After that, they all settled back into their chairs and stared gloomily hither and thither, partially because of the situation with their father, but probably mainly because it was Christmas Eve. I mean, seriously, fuck Christmas Eve. It's not Christmas, it's just an Eve. Hurry up and be Christmas already, you stupid Eve. Why does it have to be such a stupid, relentless prick tease of an occasion? Just like goddamn Eric, she thought to herself. It didn't take long before things began to get interesting. "We've got to rescue Dad somehow," Ryan spat. A thick trail of saliva ran down his shiny chin and there was a weird urgent spark in his eyes. Casey perched forward on her chair like a petite little bird about to take wing. "Elfman can help us," she tittered. "I know he can." Amy gave a start, which by my count makes it 3. This shit was kicking in even faster than she'd anticipated. "What did you just call him?" she asked. Casey glanced at her with surprise, looking for all the world like she hadn't even known she was in the room with her until that very moment. She was grinding her little bird-like jaw with a painful-looking monotony. "Elfman!" Ryan leapt bolt upright from his chair. He was somehow now pantsless, and his t-shirt failed to sufficiently cover the shock of his tiny preteen junk. "Like Superman or Spider-Man," he exclaimed. "He's like a superhero with special powers, but just doesn't know how to use them." "Wow," thought Amy. "If only we could find a way to make Elfman believe in himself," he offered, "so he could realise his true potential." Casey took the bait. "A costume," she called. "What, Casey?" Grandma asked uncertainly. Her eyes were unfocused. Blinking, her wrinkled, spotted fist clenching and unclenching. "Let's make Elfman a costume," screeched Casey. Amy stifled a giggle. "Oh yeah, now it's a party." Ryan and Casey bounded into action, Casey with little avian shrieks and Ryan with a feral sort of grunting. Casey fluttered to her bedroom where she retrieved as many clothes as she could carry before returning and dumping them in the centre of the floor. Ryan ran to a nearby sideboard where he retrieved a CD before proudly adding it to the top of the pile. Grandma had by now eased herself from the restriction of her chair and was wandering around the room with some trepidation. Every now and then she would gather an item before regarding it with something approximating terror and putting it quickly back down again. Casey made another trip to her room, returning with yet more clothes. Ryan retrieved a baseball from his own, depositing it on the growing central mound. Everybody shrugged. Sure, why not, Ryan? Grandma had found her knitting. She raised it up to her face before giving a wordless scream and throwing it away from her. It too landed in the pile. Amy spread out the gathered fabric and other items, minus the baseball, on the dining room table. Casey said, "Caw!" Ryan said, "Ugh." Grandma slumped silently in the far corner, mouth open in a silent her eyes bulged wide in a rictus of purest horror. Amy smiled. She watched as Ryan put on a Christmas hat, on top of a baseball hat, on top of a pair of safety goggles, on top of the CD. "Ugh," he said. "Ugh, ugh." Casey scratched feverishly at the surface of the table. "Caw," she cried. "Caw, caw." Amy leaned in for a closer look at Casey's handiwork. In the midst of a lot of chicken scratches and cuss words, Casey had managed to draw a stylized E onto one of her polo shirts. It looked for all like the world like some kind of a logo for an Elfman costume, apart from, being scribbled onto a polo shirt. Still, Amy was almost impressed. Say what you want about her tolerance to amphetamines, but this kid is on message. Casey looked up at Amy with a maniacal grin. A thin stream of blood jet rhythmically from her nostrils with every beat of her tiny bird-like heart. Caw! Everyone approved of this design. Well, Casey did at least. Grandma was already unconscious, an occasional involuntary spasm, the only indication that there was life left in her old bones. Ryan was softly humping the bedside table, his little white buttocks moving to a beat only he could ever hear. Every now and then he glanced over his shoulder at Amy to make sure she was still watching him. She didn't plan to, but she could not look away. Eventually Amy skimmed back to Casey, but the little girl had already joined her grandma in the deep, sweet bliss of the unknown. Slumped face first on the table, a halo of crimson billowed disturbingly around the edge of her downy skull. With a last grunt, Ryan finished and sank to the ground, with his whole body producing the occasional keening sob. After a while, he too slept. And then Amy got bored again. She recalled there had at one time been a fifth member of this Harper family tableau. After a while, she found the little disabled outside on an open window on the roof above the patio. He was continually looking to some little gizmo in his hand and then casting mournful glances at the sky. Is it waiting out here for a glimpse of Santa Claus? It was almost too pathetic a scene to disturb. Almost. She crawled out of the open window and eased herself beside him. "No Santa?" she asked. "He'll be here," it said. "Busy night for him." It didn't reply. After a moment it seemed to notice she was carrying something. "What is that?" it asked, pointing to the bundle in her hands. With a start, she realized she'd snatched up Casey's handiwork from the table when she'd come hunting further fun. She cogitated quickly. "Casey and Ryan believe you're a superhero," she explained to it. "We thought if you had a costume, maybe you..." She left it trailing. "Lady, do I look like a superhero?" the little freak asked. She had to stop herself from describing what it did look like. Besides, would it even know where Guerrero Street was? Instead, she said, "Well, no superhero looks like a superhero until they discover their true powers," which is a less convincing thing to say than perhaps no superhero looks like a superhero until they had put on their costume. But by then, Amy had slipped herself a little toot of Trucker Crank too. It said, "I've been making toys for years, getting them out on Christmas, wondering the whole time what it would be like to be down here in the world of kids. Now I know. You people are crazy." "Wait, what? Making toys?" she asked herself. "Does Eric have some kind of a sweatshop deal going on here?" Suddenly she was feeling despicably sexy things for Eric again. Out loud she said, "Now you listen to me. You are Elfman." To herself she added, "Tell none of Eric's friends about yourself." Because she was riffing on that famous Batman line about telling your friends about me, and she's awesome at quips and asides. You all get it. The little freak thing rolled its oversized eyes. It was not buying what she was selling. It was time for a trip to Schmaltztown, with a minor detour along Guilt Boulevard. Amy continued, At least to Ryan and Casey, those two kids have lost the most important thing that any two kids could ever lose. Their mommy. And their dad's been working really hard to hold things together. Do you have any idea how hard things have been for this family? She stopped to see if she'd laid it on too thick. So far, it was following along. If there's only one thing you learn about how it works down here, you get this straight. It's not all about you. Christmas is about giving, about bringing joy to other people's lives, and just maybe if you tried it once, you might find that you can make it feel good about yourself too. With that, she angrily thrust the children's-sized polo shirt into its hands and re-entered the Harper residence via the window. That little freak out there, he was either going to put on that polo shirt or he wasn't. Either way, the likelihood that he would soon be stone cold dead was pleasing to her. She marched her way downstairs without looking back. To be honest, she was already beginning not to care. The amphetamines she'd snorted were by now doing their dirty work to her pleasure centres, and she had but two things on her mind. She needed something to eat, and she needed someone to fuck. And by this point in the process, if you jumbled up those combinations, she'd have barely broken stride. Because this was Amy's world, you fools, and everyone else was just in the fucking way.
Yeah.
Oh my god. Oh.
Scene 14 by Jessica. The elf gazed down at his new costume. His cape was a hastily pinned quilt. On his head was a Christmas hat, and his face was protected by safety glasses and a ski mask. Casey had drawn an E onto a top and matched it with green shorts and red tights. Green gloves and white boots finished the ensemble. He felt like a god. Like a saloon door in a spaghetti western, the porch swing moved creakily in the breeze. The elf, now fully committed to his new incarnation as Elfman, stood defiantly before the front door. He glared at Big Bucket, Mickey and JP, who were taking up strategic positions. Several western cliches took place, which were very humorous if you were familiar with the genre, but the men were too tense to notice. Mickey strode up the path, but Elfman stood firm. "Why don't you go crawl back under the rock you came from? 'Cause you've got no business here," Elfman said with more bravery than sense. JP and Big Bucket began to advance towards him. "Who says so?" said Mickey, both rhetorically and idiotically. Elfman took a deep breath and felt the power of the costume surge through him. "Elfman!" he declared optimistically. Mickey blew a raspberry to signal his skepticism. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his weapon, mistletoe. As he waved it in Elfman's face, it began to give off blue light. Elfman wilted before its toxic power and stumbled backward. "Not mistletoe!" he choked in agony as his body began to break down at the cellular level and his organs shut down. Eric and Amy heard his anguished cries and ran to the door. Wait a minute, did we miss a chapter? How did Eric get free?
No idea.
Okay.
Probably Dave's fault.
They stood in horror, watching the very life force being sucked from the elf as the thugs invaded the house. Their weapons, a plunger and a rolling pin, now seemed tragicomic in their uselessness against this exotic form of violent torture. Ryan and Casey appeared on the landing just in time to see the scene which would haunt them for the rest of their lives and cost their father dearly in therapy bills. "Stay back," threatened Mickey as the light from the mistletoe turned from blue to red and the elf's body seemed to wither and shrink as it writhed in pain. "Elfman! Stop! You're hurting him!" Casey screamed in horror. "You let the elf go! Let him go!" shouted Grandma, unable to grasp the fact that this was a scenario she was unable to control. Mickey snarled at Eric. "You are going to give me that TX 180 right now." "You are a violent, disgusting human being," said Amy, apparently under the misapprehension that the criminals would be swayed by this criticism. "Ooh, and you are my type," leered Mickey, desperately trying to shore up the facade of heterosexuality he felt the need to display to his criminal cohort. From the stairs, Ryan shouted, "You have no right to take my dad's invention." "Ah, you are correct, but we're doing it anyway," JP explained, realizing that this family didn't fully understand how crime worked. "We are big and strong, and you are little." Meanwhile, the elf's twisted grey body, racked with pain, seemed to quiver with its last breath. Eric could no longer be a party to his agonizing death. "Okay, enough." He put down the plunger. "Let him go. We'll give you what you came for. Casey, give me the elf doll." The doll was passed from Casey to Eric to Mickey, who pulled the chip from the costume. "Oh ho ho," said Mickey, trying to keep things festive. He callously dropped the mistletoe on the elf's tortured body as he shoved the chip in his pocket. "We're out of here." As the three persecutors left the house, Mickey whooped with delight and flung the doll into the shrubs. Inside, Ryan ran to the elf's aid. "Ryan, don't!" shouted his cowardly father, but Ryan ignored his craven warnings. He pulled the mistletoe off the elf's barely living body and tried to free him from its effects, but the link was unbroken. Suddenly, Casey shouted, "Kiss! Kiss under the mistletoe!" Ryan nodded in agreement. "It'll reverse the negative energy," he shouted, based on nothing in particular. Amy and Eric began to vigorously make out under the mistletoe, while Ryan tried to avert his eyes, trapped within hearing distance of the slurping, smacking sounds of his father's amateur attempts at kissing. Casey, brainwashed by popular culture's deification of heterosexual lovemaking, was more enthusiastic. "It's working! Keep kissing!" she shrieked. Indeed, for some reason, this off-putting scene of passion was in fact forcing life energy back into the twisted body of the elf. His bloodshot eyes slowly opened. His cracked lips parted. "I am not a hobbit," he declared in a wavering voice weakened by his suffering. "I am not a leprechaun, nor a troll, nor a munchkin. I am none of these things. I am Elfman!" He forced his ruined, probably cancer-riddled body up and pushed his bleeding fists into the air. For some reason, his homemade costume suddenly transformed into a more professional, yet still economical-looking outfit. Compelled by forces they did not understand, yet could not resist, Casey, Ryan, and Grandma chanted as though hypnotized, "Go, Elfman!" The family and Amy, whose lips, chin, and neck, now being anointed with harper saliva, now felt like an honorary family member, watched in confusion as Elfman's boots inexplicably became jets, raising him into the air. After some brief, ostensibly humorous near failure of the jets, Elfman zoomed into the night to wreak bloody and terrible vengeance on those who had tortured and humiliated him.
Shit.
Chapter 15 by Courtney. Inside the barn, Mickey, JP, and Big Bucket hesitated as they heard an eerie whistling throughout the building. It was to the tune of Silent Night. Elfman was toying with them, but Mickey was unperturbed. "I'm not leaving here without the chip, you hear me, Elf?" He told Bucket to watch the doors as he and JP ventured further into the barn. Meanwhile, the family and Amy were watching with great anticipation from the kitchen. They were so focused on the barn that they didn't notice Casey and Ryan sneaking off at first. When they did, Eric and Amy quickly dashed after them, but the children had a good head start. Mickey and JP soon found a ladder and made their way to the loft. The whistling sounded louder, but like the chirp of a cricket, it was impossible to place the source. Mickey called out, "Hey, listen, why don't you just step out here and we can talk about this man to, elf?" He heard no reply, but continued wandering further into the loft. "I'm sure we can come to some sort of an arrangement. What do you say, huh?" Mickey's heart was racing. Surely he wasn't afraid of an elf. Elves were nothing compared to trolls. Elves were just... Ha! Mickey jumped in fright when he felt something against his back. Spinning around, he realized it was just JP. Mickey scowled and shook his head. What an idiot. He'd had to look where he was going. Downstairs, the children barely made it into the barn before Big Bucket noticed them. "Hey, gotcha!" They screamed and ran off before he could grab them, Eric and Amy rushed in. "You stay away from those kids," Eric shouted, swinging a shovel at Big Bucket, feeling like Ellen Ripley going up against the Xenomorph Queen. Only, unlike Ripley, Eric's paternal rage was ineffectual against his enemy. Bucket simply grabbed the shovel and forced the handle under Eric's throat. But before he could do anything else, Amy was on the criminal's back. She managed to grapple with him for a few seconds before Bucket tossed both of them into a pile of hay before climbing the ladder to join his companions. "Are you okay?" Amy lay next to Eric. "I'm good," he said, gazing into her eyes. Outside, amongst the expanse of pure white snow, a dark figure was moving slowly but with great determination on what appeared to be 6 legs. Its warm breath creating fog as the figure made a tremendous effort to reach the barn. It was Grandma and her walking frame. "The devil is coming," she cried. Her battle cry, for if those crooks dare lay a hand on her grandbabies, there would be no force on earth to stop her. Her grandchildren were relatively fine for now. They were climbing up into the rafters of the barn. "Just come out," Mickey demanded. He had not noticed the children until they closed the latch. Clang! "Ah, someone's up after their bedtime." Before Mickey could take another step towards Casey and Ryan, Elfman finally emerged from his hiding place, flying past the villains. "Go, Elfman!" Ryan called, and Elfman gave the boy a thumbs up before flying circles around Mickey and JP, confusing and dizzying them until they fell down into the hay. Meanwhile, Casey and Ryan threw parcels at Bucket. "Hey, a little help here?" Bucket called down to his cohorts. One might think that it's inconsistent that Bucket could handle 2 grown adults in a fight, and yet parcels light enough to be thrown by children presented a challenge. However, most people are not aware of Bucket's father, who had been a postal worker, and who had been killed on this very day, 15 years ago, in a tragic accident involving parcels. JP was soon at Bucket's side. It's the naughty ones. Ever look in the mirror, French fry? Ryan taunted as as yet more parcels were thrown, an infinite stream of parcels seemingly emerging from nowhere. "They're just kids," Mickey exclaimed as a parcel hit him in the face. The word parcel had stopped having any meaning, while they continued to be bombarded by more parcels. While the criminals were distracted, Elfman came and landed by the entrance. "Gentlemen, may I show you the door?" Mickey spun around. "There you are. I'm gonna wipe that Christmas cheer right off your face." He charged down to the elf, who flew off at the last second, leaving Mickey sprawled on the floor. While the villains regrouped at the door, Eric and Amy joined the children in the loft. Ryan had a secret weapon, Grandma's fruitcake. He passed it to his father, who, in turn, tossed it to Elfman. The elf nodded with a grin. "Ha! A fruitcake? Is that all you've got, elf?" Mickey laughed. His cohorts joined in. Their laughter suddenly ceased as the cake was dropped to the ground and grew several meters in diameter as it rolled towards them. The men were sent tumbling out of the barn, landing on their backs. The giant cake turned around and hovered above them. Suddenly a monstrous face emerged from the already hideous surface of the cake, and they all let out involuntary screams. The bad guys defeated, the family cheered, and Elfman gave a thumbs up as they applauded him. Just then, 2 cop cars pulled up as Grandma arrived too late. JP, Mickey, and Bucket were all cowering on the ground, covered in nuts and crumbs and fruit. "This isn't over. I'll get you for this, Elfman," Mickey cried. "You're not going anywhere, you naughty, naughty boy," Grandma said menacingly as she trapped her in with her walking frame. The man looked genuinely terrified.
And chapter 16, the final chapter by Luke. Elfman, Ryan, Casey, Amy, and Eric watched from the comfort of the barn as the no-good bad guys were deftly shackled by Officer Schlub. It made them feel good about themselves, and for a moment there was peace. And then, like a bolt from the blue, another memory jolted Ryan to life. His muscles tensed. What happened to Dad's chip? I mean, that's the whole fucking reason we got into this mess. Someone had to be keeping track of it, right? Elfman grinned. "Excuse my manners," he chirped, but despite being smaller stature, he let out the most obscene belch. It was a filthy, ancient, eldritch thing, smelling of pure evil. It coalesced into a bloated bubble, and within this bobbing, wretched mouth fart of a thing shone the prized electronic chip. The bubble burst, and Eric plucked his treasure out of the air. "Ah, thank you," Eric lied. The stench was foul. "Is Santa coming back to get you?" asked Ryan, hopefully. Elfman groggily nodded. "You're gonna leave us?" asked Casey, hopefully. "I'm afraid I have to," said the stinky little elf. "No," lied Casey, mustering everything she'd learnt from grade 1 drama class, and took this opportunity to dramatically storm off. "Casey!" Undeterred, the elf was hot on her heels. "She's too young to be wearing heels," thought Eric. "Look, this is tough for me too," blustered Elfman. "You and your brother are the best friends an elf could ever have. You had faith in me. You made me realize who I really am. I'm Elfman." Casey was bewildered. "You can live with us and fight crime?" she asked, hoping against all hope that it wasn't an option. "Casey," implored Elfman, "my true home is the North Pole, making toys and bringing joy all over the world. Santa's counting on me, but if you ever need my help again, make a wish and I'll be here." Casey smiled sadly. That wish thing was disappointing. "I love you, Elfman," she lied. "I love you too," Eli replied, and they shared a resentful hug. It was all too much for those no-good stinking bad guys who were up against the wall, having every ounce of dignity smacked out of them by the uncaring fists of the stern Officer Schlub. "I never got a single toy when I was a kid. Every Christmas nothing," cried Mickey. Wait, was heroin a toy? Technically, he didn't think so. "Me neither," agreed Big Bucket. He'd need a big bucket for all those tears, but fucked if Santa was going to bring him one. All I ever got was a tiny little Grand Prix race car, agreed JP, and it was missing a tyre. I didn't even get that, sobbed Mickey, who would have dreamed of a missing tyre. Officer Schlub dispassionately battened him in the balls. Eric's family viewed the tears and misery from their prime spot on the hay bales. Dad, where are they going? Asked Ryan as Mickey's nutbag took another solid whack. They're going to jail, replied Eric solemnly. On Christmas, said Ryan. He'd heard some horror stories about jail, but then again he'd also sneaked in a couple of episodes of Orange is the New Black and was intrigued by all the licking. Eric looked increasingly uneasy. He had no idea how to interpret the increasingly weird expression on his son's face. Thankfully, Elfman interrupted by dragging Casey back into the fray and then forcing Ryan into an unsolicited fist bump. Be good, bud, he threatened. I will, gasped Ryan. The elf glanced at Eric and pointed at Amy. Don't let her go. She's a keeper, he warned. A beekeeper. But that was another story. Satisfied enough time had been wasted, Elfman headed for the door. He wiped a single tear from his hideous face. Fucking allergies. Elfman waved to the family. They waved back, except for the contrarian Amy, who gave him a 2-finger peace salute instead. Damn hippies and their fresh honey. And with that, Elfman gymnastically backflipped into the night sky. It was enough to make even the bad guys pause. Because, high among the glittering stars, Elfman marked out Casey's non-copyrighted E logo. Everybody thought it was fucking amazing. The light from the logo then somehow turned into snow, blanketing the barn, the family, and the bad guys. They were filled with good feeling. Even Officer Schlub paused from his beating for a second to watch Elfman go. Merry Christmas, yelled Elfman, and then he was gone. Wow, I guess he really is a superhero, exclaimed Bucket, who was easily manipulated. And behind him, Eric's house lit up with a garish cacophony of Christmas lights. It was a real winter wonderland. Fuck these crooks, thought Eric, racing his family inside, fingers crossed that all that had changed too. It was like one of those home makeover shows, but without the commercials. And sure enough, Eric, Amy, Ryan, Casey, even Grandma, who was hanging on by a thread, were delighted to find the whole house decorated with tinsel and lights and snowmen. It was like the whole place was drenched in Santa bukkake. It's amazing, gasped Ryan, wiping tinsel from his chin. And there, under the magnificent tree, were a whole lot of brightly wrapped presents. It was like a Walmart exploded. You see that? Eric asked Grandma, genuinely concerned about her cataracts. She couldn't see much, but she could certainly smell the Christmas feast that had materialized on the dining table. Turkey, potatoes, stuffing. Grandma had been secretly surviving on dog food for years. Her gunt grumbled as the kids tore at the presents like vultures on a carcass. And proudly above the fireplace hung a row of 4 stockings. Dad, Ryan, Casey, and Amy. Amy had earned herself a stocking. The ghost of the dead mother was exorcised and would no longer darken their home with its looming guilt. Amy was here to stay, and that meant plenty more ham. Oh, and the elf doll was there too. Eric smiled to see him sitting among the decorations, now wearing his brand new Elfman costume. You had to save a magical memory like this one, so Eric set up his camera as they all jostled for position in front of the tree. Perfect, lied Eric, surveying their hideous faces. Yeah, let's get a little closer. They grudgingly did what they were told. Eric's demands seemed to have no end as he did his best to polish this turd. Everybody say, thanks, Elfman. Thanks, Elfman, they chanted with obedience. They had food, they had presents, but they'd said goodbye to dignity. Snap! But did you know that when the photo was developed, it turned out to be more than just the family? Sure, there was Eric and Amy, Grandma, Ryan, and little Casey, but also JP, Big Bucket, and Mickey, who were there smiling at the edge of the frame. And Officer Schlub was beating the shit out of Mickey's battered scrotum. Eric smiled and stuck it on the fridge. The end! Merry Christmas, everybody! We did it! Holy shit. And a round of applause to you, dear listener, if you made it this far. Because that was enough to test anybody's patience. Thank you so much, guys. What an achievement.
It's alright.
Continuity was such a weird thing.
Yeah. I still don't really understand Elfman. But that was kind of beautiful for Christmas. I want to say that I am going to take a little bit of a break from Book Was Better. It's going to be a couple of weeks off, but I'm going to put up some classic shows, some classic Jess McLeod shows.
The original series.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that haven't heard our original 30 episodes.
That's crazy.
So I thought we might put up some classic episodes that aren't easy to get on iTunes or impossible to get on iTunes. I'll record a little bit of a intro just so people know what's happening.
Great idea.
But I think I'll start with The Net, if you can remember that
nice.
one.
Oh, I
Yeah.
cannot forget it.
So listen to those over the holidays, and then we'll be back in the new year with some brand new shows, hopefully featuring many of the delightful people that you all heard today. So yeah, thanks so much. Support us, iTunes, rate, review, like our Facebook, do all those fantastic things. You guys, anything you want to chip in, add, say?
Merry Christmas!
Everybody say Elfman! Elfman!
Well, there you go. That's the actual other thing, because you can't end on Elfman.
Oh. Oh, yeah. Catch you on the flips.
Jumanji!